Thank you, Belen. I will now call the hearing to order. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. This morning, I'll be chairing the hearing. My name is Robert Hutchings. On my direct left is Miss Billinghurst. On my far left is Miss Stevens. Representing the Assessment and Taxation Department, City of Winnipeg, is Miss Wareham. And our secretary today will be Miss Rojo. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which a revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by council and is independent of it and the city administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application or exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with this board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following their swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions from the assessor and the panel members. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are recorded and will be part of the public record. And please, out of courtesy, can everybody make sure their cell phones are on complete silence? Okay, Belen, if you could swear in the parties, please. Thank you.
Lindsay Elliott.
And Ms. Ryan, to represent is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, help you God?
Yes.
Thank you. Please state your full name. And you swear given to represent is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, help you God? Thank you. Do you want me to prove the one?
Actually, you know what? It's okay when I'm here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Belen. Good morning, Ms. Wareham, Mr. Newman. First property in the docket this morning is file number 19-1719 on McDermott Avenue, and we're dealing with a 2020 Realty appeal. Okay. Ms. Wareham, when you are ready, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to start by saying that we're looking at the 2020 reassessment, as you guys know, and the City of Winnipeg wants to state in all the hearings that we're taking a fresh look. For every reassessment, we review new information as of the reference date. We look at that information, we analyze it, mailers, sales, with respect to the reference date, and we're required by legislation to make sure that we're doing a new reassessment, taking a fresh look at the data, and then adjusting how we look at properties. So there could be changes in how we look at properties, there may not be, but we have to go where the data takes us. So we just wanted to reiterate that, again, this is a fresh look looking at 2020 general reassessment with a reference date of April 1st, 2018. So as stated, this is file number 19-1719, roll number 13096043-100, and the address is McDermott Avenue. If you look at page 2 of my brief, you'll see the location of the subject property. This is a surface parking lot on the northwest corner of McDermott Avenue and Ship Street. It's right near Waterfront Drive. This is a surface parking lot with 13 outdoor stalls, and the 2020 assessed value is $359,000. On page 3, you'll see some subject property photos. This property is operated or managed by Indigo Parking, their parking management company. On page 4, you'll see request for income and expense information. And on page 5, you'll see the income valuation summary for the parking. Just as a reference, our parking has always been, and this cycle again, it's about it's modeled on a net per stall basis. So we don't come up with a gross rate and then apply an expense ratio to come up with our net per stall rates. We work directly from net operating incomes reported on mailers. And the reason we do this is because there are so many different variables with respect to parking. Different management agreements, who pays what expenses, some mailers we get have few expenses, some have a lot. So because of all of those variables and those many different management agreements that happen within parking lots, we work directly from the net operating income. So what's reported on the net operating income line of a income and expense mailer, we work it down to a per stall basis and then we model that. We also model an expense ratio for informational purposes to get an idea of what a typical expense ratio is to help us when we're looking at mailers for subject properties, for appeals, and while we're getting our information together for our general reassessment cycles. So this parking lot has 13 stalls and our monthly net unit rent that's been modeled is $103.50. Our cap rate for 2020 is 4.5%. Coming up with a value of $359,000. On the bottom of my page 5, you'll see a number of comparables. These are all comparables within close proximity to the subject property. They're all in the exchange. They're all within walking distance of one another and very close together. So they're extremely comparable. If you look, number 6 is the subject property on the sheet. And they have reported that they have a 44% expense ratio and that they're making $105.51 a stall. A typical expense ratio that we've looked at for the 2020 reassessment cycle is about 45%. So they're reporting a very typical response that we see. On page 6, you'll see the income valuation summary, and on page 7, you'll see cap rate information. Our cap rates that we come up with in the model are derived based on reconstructed net operating incomes applied against time-adjusted sale prices. What we've done is we've taken what other real estate companies and investment companies, when they look at what sort of cap rates are happening in different cities, they look at a number of property types, and property types that they look at are listed on this page 7. So what we've done is we've listed what they show in comparison to what our model has come up with those same property types. On page 8, you'll see Municipal Assessment Act information. And if you actually could turn to page 18 of my brief, 17 and 18, what we've also done is we've gone a step further this cycle to show some actual sales of property types to go a bit further. So instead of taking what's reported in market reports for capitalization rates and showing it against our models, what we're doing is taking actual sales of different property types. So we have a number of office properties where the cap rates range from 5.1% upwards of 6.35. A number of retail properties that have cap rates that range from 3.1 upwards of 7.4. Multifamily, we have a range of 4.03 upwards of 5%. And then industrial, we have a range of 4.97 to 8%. Now, as you'll notice, it's very obvious there are no parking lots on any of these sheets. We haven't presented that information, but with respect to parking lots, the difficulty with coming up with cap rates for them is it's not something that sells frequently. And when it does sell, it's hard to tell if it's purchased for long-term investment to sell in the future for redevelopment, if it's purchased as an ancillary use, if it's purchased and then redeveloped right away. So caution has to be taken with respect to looking at cap rates. The most recent cap rate that is a solid cap rate with respect to a parking lot was at 170 William Stevenson Way. And it was a share sale from a REIT that reported the cap rate at 6%. And that was in 2010. And what we've noticed at the City of Winnipeg, that income property types, cap rates have been compressing since that time. And the thought that we have is that was the last reported one at 6%. Cap rates have been compressing. Investors are expecting lower rates of return on their investment. As well, Parking lots are an interim use. They're essentially vacant land which do not have a cap rate on them. So if someone purchases a parking lot with a low net operating income on it and redevelops it into something else, the cap rate that you're gonna see on those properties is like 1%, 2%, something very, very low. And then we see a large range of cap rates. So the logic that we've taken, because when you're looking at values and similar to appraisers, if you don't have the evidence, you have to look outside the box. You have to think of what is reasonable and what is logical. Other property types, cap rates are trending downwards. Investors are expecting lower rates of return on their investment. As well, investment properties that have capital costs, like multifamily, office buildings, retails, those have depreciating assets that people have to repair, HVAC systems, roofs, all sorts of things like that. Where a parking lot does not have that capital investment that needs to be happening. I'm not saying that they don't have capital costs that happen in parking lots, they absolutely do, but the level of them is not par with other properties that have more of those. So for us to look at a piece of vacant land that typically doesn't have a cap rate, to have a higher cap rate than an office building or an apartment building doesn't make sense. It doesn't make reasonable sense if you look at the reasonable appraiser test. When you're looking at appraisal theory, it just doesn't follow that. So we believe that 4.5%, we're confident with that number. So that's the cap rate that's been modeled for this area. On page 9 of my brief, you'll see the subject property income and expense mailer information. And this is the mailer that was submitted by the property owner. On page 14, you'll see the Indigo details that they offer evening parking in this lot. So that they don't actually offer daytime parking to the public, but they do offer evening parking to the public. And then on page 15, through the end of my brief is the addenda. You'll see the fresh look that I spoke about previously, the cap rates on page 17 and 18, and then the last 2 pages are the addenda for non-recoverable expenses, which we don't have to talk about for parking. I did get into a lot of detail with respect to parking lots and cap rates. I hope that you're taking that information for the remainder of the properties on the docket today, so we don't have to go through it every time. But if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer, or if there's some clarification that needs to happen, I'm happy to focus on that. That's my presentation, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wareham. Mr. Newman, any questions of the assessor's evidence?
Yes, and as the assessor has noted, I will ask a series of questions now and not repeat them.
Thank you.
And they can be taken as applying to all of the appeals.
All right, noted.
So, but let me start by asking you some general questions. In many ways, I think your presentation anticipated some of it. But you noted that at page 7 is the capitalization rate chart for various types of properties, and you noted there are no parking lots on that, and you indicated the reason, there's 2 reasons I guess. One, they don't sell frequently, and secondly, even when parking lots do sell, it's sometimes difficult to tell what the motivation is, what the purpose of the sale is. Is that fair?
The reason they're not on this particular chart isn't really that reason. It's a reason why we haven't presented cap rates in our brief with respect to parking. But the reason it's not on this chart is because what we've done is Colliers, CBRE, Cushman, Wakefield, they don't present or do market analyses on parking lots, parking structures, number of property types. They focus on the property types listed here. So what we've done is we've taken the same property types that they analyze and show our information for.
Okay.
So they also don't analyze.
All right, so to clarify, not on page 7.
Yes.
Because these brokerage firms are not reporting parking lot sales.
Correct.
And then when we go to page, I guess page 15, starting at page 15 of your material and continuing through page 18, that's the additional material that the city is attaching to every assessment brief being filed on this cycle, correct?
Correct.
And the purpose of that is to reinforce the concept that the city's taking a fresh look. Okay, I hear that, now let's put that aside. But the other purpose is to provide a sampling of capitalization rates from actual transactions as a way of supporting the city's model.
Correct.
Okay. And as you've noted, there are no parking lots the city has included as part of this chart, and I'm anticipating the reason for that is, as you said earlier, they don't sell frequently, it's hard to tell what the motivation is, and there just isn't good data available.
We wanted to present, when we presented this information, really good arm's length bona fide transactions that have been vetted, that have 3 years of stabilized income and expense information on them. We wanted to present solid cap rates to the board. We don't want to come in and present things that involve things that need to be spoken to. This is a supplementary piece of information that we're adding to our information to just say, look, we do analyze sales. Here are some of them that we've analyzed. This gives you an idea of what is actually happening in the market, because there's a lot of concern with the low cap rates that are in our model, and we needed to show applicants, owners, the panels, that these numbers are real. They're coming from somewhere.
And you know, as you say, you wanted to present hard data, but bottom line is, there is no hard data in respect to parking lots, correct?
There's not something that doesn't involve some commentary on, which in the appraisal world and assessment world, when you're looking at information, perfect comparables, perfect sales, things that are just great for your subject property, that doesn't exist. You have to be reasonable, and you have to be able to explain the decisions that are made, and appraisers would do the same thing. If they were to appraise a property that doesn't have hard evidence on it, they would have to do exactly what we've done.
You noted a sale going back to 2010 on William Stevenson Way at a 6% cap. And is it fair to say that if we look back to the past cycles, in 2014 the cap rate was 6%, in 2016 it was 5%, in 2018 it was 5%, and all of this in relation to what I'll call downtown surface parking lots. And then for the 20 cycle, it's 4.5%.
Correct.
That's the history.
Yes.
And you've indicated that because cap rates are compressing, from the city's perspective, it's logical to anticipate that cap rates for surface parking lots will compress as well, and hence the reduction in the cap rates over the years.
Yes, that in addition to looking at the range of cap rates that are seen on the parking lot sales. Again, there's sales that happen and you have to be wary when looking at them. If something has been redeveloped and sells, it's showing cap rates of 1%, 2%, things that are very, very low. When you're looking at other parking lots, we have parking lots that sell and have 6% cap rates, 8% cap rates, but we're doing mass appraisal, and we have to look at what the market would expect. The market's not gonna expect 1% on everything, the market's not gonna expect 8% on everything. We're working in mass appraisal and we're working with market, so 4.5% is sort of our median.
So bottom line is, you've chosen to present no capitalization rates in respect of surface parking lots for 2020, and the position of the city is simply that for the downtown surface lots anyways, a 4.5 cap is appropriate based on the downward progression of other capitalization rates, correct?
Yes.
Okay. You're aware that capitalization rates typically follow bond rates?
Yes, in some cases, yeah.
And you're aware that at April 1 of 16 and then to April 1 of 18, Bank of Canada rate increased by 75 basis points?
I'm not aware of the bond rates at the reference date.
And this lot, as you've noted, is 3,454 square feet.
Yes.
Now, the model, so you've indicated the model works off a net rate per stall per month to create the NOI, to which a capitalization rate is then applied.
Mm-hmm.
I understand, however, that the model for surface parking lots will analyze value in two different ways, both from an income approach and from a land value approach. Is that correct?
That's correct on all of our property types.
Okay. And that with surface parking lots, having done the analysis of value from both perspectives, the model will automatically default to the higher of the values.
That's just how our computer system works. It's just sort of something that happens. Even if we're working on a property, if we change a factor while we're working on it, our system will automatically flip it over, so we have to be always cognizant to make sure we're putting things back to how they need to.
And you noted earlier that parking lots are interim uses, generally, correct?
They can be, yes, in some cases.
And I'll clarify that in the sense of saying a 3,400 square foot property, it's not likely an interim use. Probably a parking lot is as good as it's going to get for that type of property.
That is a good assumption.
And larger properties, however, will have development potential, and therefore parking is an interim use.
That could be true.
Okay. But as you've indicated, the model is set to default to the higher value based on the two approaches. Do you know that with the provincial assessor, for example, their models actually do the exact opposite? They default to the lower value?
I cannot speak to anything the province does. We are a totally different assessment jurisdiction, and we analyze our information and use different computer systems. We are two very separate entities.
Now, but the purpose of the capitalization rate is to give the investor a return on their investment. It's to reflect the risk, correct?
Okay.
So if I have a surface parking lot in the downtown area, which gets a 4.5, but I have a surface parking lot outside the downtown area, it's going to get a higher capitalization rate, isn't it?
Yes.
But isn't the risk exactly the same for a parking lot, no matter where it's located?
Not necessarily, because a parking lot in the downtown has the potential to produce an income for their owner, where when you're a parking lot outside of the downtown, they don't often have that potential. You don't see a lot of income being charged on suburban parking lots. There's a small handful of parking lots that actually have parking management companies that are taking an income, where downtown, parking is a huge business.
But that difference, what you're saying really is there's a difference in demand in the downtown area as compared to outside the downtown area.
Yes, but when you speak to risk, if you've got a demand, your risk then lowers compared to what your risk would be if you just wanna buy a parking lot on St. James Street and try to get people to park there and pay money.
But ultimately, I'm gonna suggest to you that that demand is reflected in the income the property can generate. That tells you, the NOI tells you what the property can do. Do you agree?
You know, Mr. Newman, in all fairness to the assessor, she hasn't presented out of downtown cap rate information, not that I'm aware of, so I don't know if we're having a hypothetical argument
Well,
or.
the point.
Okay, what
Mr.
is the point?
The point, Mr. Chairman, is that the assessor is telling us that there should be a capitalization rate of 4.5% for all downtown lots. My point is, I don't understand why there's a difference between what I'm gonna call outside downtown and within downtown. And the assessor tells me the difference is that the income generating capability outside downtown is less. And my question to her is, but that's already reflected in the net operating income. So essentially, I'm gonna suggest it's getting counted twice in the sense that the downtown lots, they're greater income
Okay,
generating.
I think you're kind of presenting evidence here.
Well, I'm explaining to you why the question's relevant.
Well, okay, but she's sitting here having to defend a department policy that we're not dealing with out of downtown on any of these properties today. Okay, you understand where I'm coming from here?
Well, I do, and you know, I'll say, Mr. Chairman, respectfully, I mean, the issue here is where the cap rates come from, and we've already heard clearly there's no transactional evidence. So, I mean, I can present this as part of my direct evidence, that's fine, but I wanted to try and do it this way, so I'll move on.
Okay, thank you.
And one last question, so, and this lot isn't an example, but because I'm asking a general set of questions. There are parking lots that are tied to buildings, as opposed to being freestanding available parking lots at large. When the parking lots are connected to a building, is the department prepared to treat the parking lot as a single economic unit together with the building?
Absolutely not when it is in the downtown zoning bylaw, because the downtown zoning bylaw does not require parking for buildings to have for customers or tenants. Outside of the downtown, the suburban bylaw indicates a certain number of parking stalls that a building needs on per square footage, the type of use of the building. Those are all requirements. So our view on, again, suburban parking versus downtown is much different. We look at downtown parking. We have a number of properties that I've looked at that offers parking at a subsidized rate or free parking to their tenants because it's attached to a building. And if you are in the downtown, the city is assessing you just like everybody else at market. What is a willing purchaser and buyer if someone was going to take this parking lot as a single economic unit? It's a business decision to decide to operate it in conjunction with a building. It's a business decision with respect to your real estate portfolio, but the city has to assess on market and what a buyer would expect.
So in summary, what you're saying is that outside of the downtown area, because the zoning bylaw requirements are different, those parking lots outside will be treated as part of an economic unit.
They wouldn't be treated as part of an economic unit, they would be reviewed as to what is happening on those properties and whether or not the parking is required. There are a number of different situations outside of the downtown, how buildings are operated, how parking is assessed and how it is conjoined, whether they're vacant lots operating as parking. There's a number of different situations that I can't really get into and speak to, but the department does not have a hard, fast rule on what we do with that sort of stuff.
It depends on how the lot is used. Yes,
Potentially.
all right. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Marla, any questions of the assessor?
No questions.
Thank you. Cynthia, any questions?
Yeah, a couple. So, have you, in the past, have you always had a different, has it been general practice for there to be a different cap rate in the suburban areas for parking lots as the downtown?
We always have
Yeah.
done that. The cap rates for each cycle have moved in conjunction. So suburban has gone down as well. We always try to keep sort of a tight parameter. I think in 2018, we had a 5% for the inner downtown and outer downtown, and then a separate cap rate for the suburban. This cycle, we have 3 separate cap rates, which we've done in the past. In 2014, we had 3 separate cap rates that were all a little bit apart, but they're all quite close together.
So is it, have you got an inner and outer and a suburban, is that how it is?
Currently
Okay,
in
this would be an
2020,
inner downtown.
yes, this is inner downtown.
Okay. And just when you were, in your presentation, you mentioned the sale on Stevenson Way, which is fairly bold sale, but at 6%. But then you talked about, just in one of your responses, about there being other sales at different rates. So are any reason why, did you mention the Stevenson Way one just because it's close proximity to the
I
subject
mentioned
property?
the Stevenson Way one because it was, it involved a REIT, so it involved an actual publication that they have to give to their investors. So it's quite reliable information to us saying that this parking lot was sold. It's an old sale, but it's still a parking lot. That's sort of why I mentioned it, because not only is the information presented to their investors, so there was a publication, it was in their quarterly report, there was a news release for it, and it said very specifically a 6% cap rate is what it sold at. So to us, that's very solid information for a parking lot. There can't be, oh, well, this person bought it, the income that's used on this, it's hard to develop a cap rate. It's a solid parking lot cap rate because it is still a parking lot 8 years later from the sale. So that's why it was mentioned. There are a number of other parking lot sales, but because parking lot sales that have sold, the parking lot that was sold at the convention center was the convention center expansion. There was a large parking lot that was sold that was developed into True North Square. There was a parking lot that was sold on the corner of Gary and St. Mary. It was sold to a parking management company. The difficulty with all of those are if we have information on them and then they've been developed, we're coming up with very low cap rates, which isn't fully appropriate to say this person bought this for a 1% cap rate because they've redeveloped it, but that's still what they purchased the property at. So you have to be careful when you're looking at that. So we try to look at everything, even if they have been developed. But then what happens if we have a number of people who don't respond to parking mailers? So if they're not responding to their mailers and we don't have the information on the few sales that there are, it becomes a difficult task to look at what's happening. Or if a parking lot sells as a multi-role sale and you can't separate out what value that purchaser put on it. So it makes it difficult. We send out sales mailers to people, those get returned, sometimes have questionable information on them, sometimes they don't get returned. So we have to work within the parameters that we have and the information that's given to us. So that's why I focused on that sale.
So the other sales had other things going on with them
Because
that you can't
it just makes it a
necessarily
little bit harder to
This was a
present
cleaner
and
sale.
explain. This was quite clean, it's something that's reported to the public, and it's not something that has been developed through our sales mailers or interpretation. It's something that is outside data that says 6% in 2010 on a parking lot that's still a parking lot. That has a number of issues actually with it.
Okay, and one final question. So you were talking about cap rate compression, and so given that, even like, you know, there's not a lot of data on parking lot sales, so is the rate that the city has put on the reduction of the cap rate from the last cycle, is that a similar compression that you're seeing, that you're putting on other properties as well, a similar percentage compression?
I can't actually speak to the compression on all the other properties because I only work in the office section, so I can't speak to the difference in cap rates not having dealt with, say, multifamily properties in the previous cycles. I can't say exactly how much they have moved, so I can't actually speak to that like clearly or confidently.
Okay, that's fine, thank you, that's all I have.
Thank you, Cynthia. Okay. Ms. Wareham. So, as I understand it, there's monthly parking, I guess, reserved parking during business hours, let's say 8 till 5, I suppose, or something like that.
Based on my history with this property, I believe it's used for tenants of a building just across the street.
Okay, and they're declaring it looks like they're charging about 185 to 190 a month.
It looks like that based on their mailer.
Yeah, okay. And in the evening, I guess are we about a block away from the ballpark?
Correct.
Okay, so we've got evening income, probably?
The Exchange District is a great place for evening parking because of the ballpark, but also all of the theaters in the area. The
Okay.
Exchange has a lot of evening parking, and when you analyze the parking data for stuff, a lot of the lots don't offer 24/7 reserved parking because they want to capitalize on that evening parking. There's a number of condo developments
Okay.
that have happened. A number of these parking lots actually offer evening monthly passes where you can park from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Oh.
So I think they're trying to cater to people who live in the Exchange, people who are coming to the Exchange to use the amenities.
Okay. So probably that income declared would include some evening parking income, I suppose?
Possibly, I
On our-
can't speak.
Yeah,
Without them separated out, I can't really speak to where the
Okay.
income comes from.
all right. And from your history with the property, there's a waiting list for the parking lot? or-
Because this is operated by Indigo, I'm
Right.
not quite sure if there's a waiting list for it. InPark typically is the parking management company that if you go to look for monthly parking, it will tell you if parking's available or if there's a wait list. Indigo just doesn't have the level of detail on their website that InPark does for the specifics of parking lots.
Okay, okay. That is all my questions. Okay, Mr. Newman, when you're ready, please.
So let me make some general comments about the methodology I use with respect to these lots. And as the assessor noted, this lot is 3,454 square feet, therefore it's quite small. And from my perspective, its future life is as a parking lot unless somebody buys this property as part of a future land assembly. It's not big enough to do any development on its own. And we'll see another lot in due course that has 4 stalls in it, and I'll suggest is in the same circumstances. Other properties that are larger in terms of their square footage do have other potential, and as the assessor noted, parking lots are an interim use, and I'll ultimately show you some material that suggests the appropriate way to value land as part of an interim use is on the direct sales comparison approach, but not on this one. On this one, because of the size of the parking lot, I accept that the income approach is the appropriate approach. What my material does is it attaches the questionnaires from the 3 prior years, 15, 16, and 17. It shows you what the income has been, and at the end of the day, the assessor is using a net operating income of $16,146. The 3 years shows you that net operating income was achieved only in 2017, that the 3-year average is $14,661, and I'm going to urge upon you that you should use the 3-year average in terms of the NOI. Then the question becomes, what's the appropriate capitalization rate? So, and here's where I'm going to speak again a little bit more generally, and then in a general sense not repeat some of the detail. But, this concept that parking lots outside the downtown area are a greater risk and therefore should get a higher capitalization rate. For example, there's another item on this docket today, the last item on the docket, where the cap rate outside the downtown area, where the cap rate is 5.5%. But I have concerns about that because I accept conceptually that a parking lot in downtown Winnipeg theoretically has greater demand generators around it, and at the end of the day, that's the key to a parking lot. Is there demand around it that creates the desire of the consumer to park their car in the lot? But many of these lots outside of the downtown core frequently are right behind office buildings. They are necessary for the operation of the office building, but frequently because they're separated by a back lane, they're on a separate roll, and therefore they're valued separately. My attitude, my view on this is that the NOI reflects the demand, the capitalization rate reflects the risk of the type of investment. A parking lot is a parking lot in some ways, I'll suggest to you, a surface parking lot anyways. And so whether it's inside the downtown core or outside the downtown core, that risk of operation of the lot is very similar. The difference is the income it will generate, which will be a function of its location potentially, I acknowledge that, but that will be reflected in the NOI. If you decrease the cap rate for something that is already picking up the demand in the NOI, like a downtown lot, then I'm going to suggest to you essentially you're double counting the value of the location and the value of the revenue it can generate. So that's one comment I want to make to you. The second comment I want to make to you is about this progression of cap rates. So it's clear there's no good data available in terms of surface parking lots. And as the assessor has noted, sometimes there are sales, you do the analysis, you get a 1% cap rate. Why do you get a 1% cap rate? Because the price the purchaser paid is not a reflection of the income being generated by the property, it's a reflection of the future use that purchaser is going to make of the property. And so when lands around the new True North development were acquired, the purchaser paid a lot of money for those on a per square foot basis because they needed it for a future high-rise commercial development. So that's why you don't see any data. I know if the department could, they would bring data forward. So the department then says, but there's a progression. There's a downward progression of capitalization rates generally, and that progression should be put in place in respect of parking lots as well. And about that I say that if you look at the Bank of Canada rates at April 1 of 16 and at April 1 of 18, interest rates in fact were not going down, they were coming up. They came up by 75 basis points in that time frame. And interest rates, which are a function of the bond market, and mortgage rates, for example, are tied to the bond market. So investors are very sensitive to what's happening in the bond market and with interest rates because of course, when they buy properties, they're leveraging, they're borrowing in order to do that, and that becomes a very critical component. I think the view is taken generally in the industry, as I'll call it, the people who do these appeals, that in fact there has not been a compression of cap rates between 2016 and 2018. And that's why I asked historically about the cap rates. So what you know is that in 14 they were 6, in 16 they went to 5. Decisions went both ways in 16. In 18 they stayed at 5, and yet for 20 they've come down to 4.5. And I say to you that there's really no evidence to support that downward progression, and if anything, the capitalization rate should be left at the historic 6%. The best evidence, the assessor says, but somewhat dated, she says, 2010. But certainly I'm going to suggest to you that a 5% capitalization rate would be appropriate. So what I tell you ultimately in terms of our position is take a 3-year average of the bottom line NOI for this lot, which is $14,661. If you capitalize at 5, that's $293,000. If you capitalize at 6, that's $269,000. And subject to questions, that's my submission to you.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Ms. William, any questions of the appellant?
I do. I just have to collect my thoughts, Mr. Chairman.
Sure,
Thank
take
you.
your time.
You indicated in your presentation, Mr. Newman, that a lot of the time parking lots are separated by a back alley, therefore they're not on the same roll, therefore they would be valued differently if they were on the same roll.
Separately, I think I said.
Okay, separately. Even if they were on the same roll, do you have experience dealing with, say, buildings in the downtown that have parking on the same roll? I.e., have you had to speak at a hearing where you have a building and they also have parking that's being assessed on the same roll number in the downtown?
The answer is yes. The answer is yes.
Okay. And has the city valued them differently, looking at the parking, than if it was standalone parking? Or does it get the model parameters for parking?
It's generally getting the model parameters for parking, although because over the years that has changed, and depending on whether it's a surface lot or a parking structure, and structures of course have different cap rates, but sometimes actually the parking lot cap rate, when it's a structure, has been higher than the building rate. Over time, it's now, in some cases, still higher than the building rate actually, because building cap rates in the city's view have come down a bit. With surface lots, generally, where there is a valuation of a separate income stream, it's done at the standard surface parking lot cap rate for that area.
Yes.
And if it's outside downtown, it's not the 4.5, it's a different rate.
Okay, thank you. My next question, you talk about interest rates in the Bank of Canada. The Bank of Canada typically sets interest rates on sort of a national level. Would you not agree that when we're looking at cap rates and what investors are going to expect, that would change from market to market? What an investor is willing to get on a cap rate for an office building in Vancouver or Toronto would be different than Winnipeg. Would you not agree that cap rates that we're looking at in Winnipeg are more site-specific to what investors are willing to get in Winnipeg versus trying to compare it to the Bank of Canada, that's sort of like a national thing?
Well, in a general sense, I would agree with you that markets in Toronto or Vancouver, for example, for downtown office buildings are more buoyant, I'll use the word. You'll find investors prepared to pay more. Of course, their incomes will be much higher, the rents in those areas. But in a general sense, investors always have their eye on bond rates and Bank of Canada rates because it drives mortgage rates, and mortgage rates are what drives the world that investors live in. They need to be able to borrow and make the payments.
Okay. Another question, clarification. You indicated that in my presentation I said there was no good parking information. Would you not agree that I said there's no perfect information and that things need to be looked at more subjectively? Because I don't know if I conceded that there's no good information.
Well, I think your comment was that you're going to have to start doing levels of analysis, and I'm gonna characterize that is that the information isn't clean, you've gotta start looking at the motivation, you've gotta start looking behind the transaction in some ways, and so therefore, but certainly at the end of the day, the data isn't good enough that the city has felt it should be brought forward.
Now, in your experience, Mr. Newman, when you're dealing with looking at properties and looking at sales and market information, and analyzing data, do you come across, if you don't come across clean, perfect information, what do you do? What are then your next steps to analyze information?
You have to look for appropriate comparisons. You have to look to the appraisal texts in terms of the methodology they recommend. And you might have to try and arrive at a conclusion by way of analogy as opposed to by way of direct evidence.
Okay. And then my last question, you're looking at the 3-year average, I guess not my last question, second last question. You're looking at the 3-year average for the subject property, and I appreciate that you're doing that. Do you have any market evidence for what parking would go for in the area, or are you just looking at the actuals in your breakdown?
Well, I used the actuals, and again, this is a managed lot, so I think the managers are aware of the market and they're marketing to it.
Okay, and then my last question, you speak that you are requesting a 5 or 6%. Do you have any solid answer as to which one you're requesting, or you're just happy to sort of?
My preference is 6.
Okay, now, do you have any information in your evidence here to show how you've arrived at your 5 or 6%?
Other than the reference to the historic that we've talked about, and my view that of where bank rates are, and my view about whether there's truly been a progression, downward progression in cap rates, that's the extent of my evidence.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, those are my questions.
Thank you. Marla, any questions of the appellant?
No, I think they've been covered, thank you.
Thank you.
I think mine have been covered as well, thank you.
Thanks, Cynthia. I'm just looking at something here, just bear with me 1 second. Okay, so Mr. Newman, on page, I'll call it page 2, I'm just looking at your work up here, and so you're using an average NOI of 14,661.
Yes.
Okay, and you're requesting at 6% cap rate.
Yes.
Would be your preference.
Yes.
Okay.
And can I just make one last observation? This is a small lot. It's 13 stalls. As an investor, there's always a scale associated with investments. How much time and energy do you want to put into managing your investment? This is a small investment. I would suggest an investor is going to want a greater return for the time to be associated with a smaller investment of this type, and hence the higher cap rate.
Okay, I'm having difficulty using your cap rate and coming up with your value. I don't know if
Is
you're,
my math bad somehow?
possibly, or mine is, I'm not sure. Would you mind checking it again, because?
Ooh, I think it is. So, 14,661, thank you, Mr. Hutchings.
All right.
14,661 at a 6 cap is 244,000.
Yeah,
And 14,661 at a 5 cap is 293,000.
yeah, that one's,
Right,
it was the lower one, or pardon me, the 6%.
yes, my bad, thank you.
All right, so you're actually, for the record, you're actually asking for 244,000.
That's correct.
Yes, okay. All right. Okay,
Mr. Chairman?
yes.
I have a redirect on your question and Mr. Newman's statements
Of course.
just a moment ago. Would I be able to ask
Yeah,
another
I just got one more question.
no
then-
problem.
Yeah, and then you can go ahead, Ms. Wareham. Okay, and then on the same page, the 3 years analysis of the revenue, expenses, and NOI. So we've got, I'm calculating it that you're asking for about $94 is, per parking spot, when you average out the NOI.
Okay?
93, 98. And when we look at the 3 years, definitely it's trending upwards. They declared in 2017 105.51 per space.
Right?
And you're asking 94, let's say, just under, shade under 94. There's a definite increase in income. For 2017, higher NOI. So, is the average kind of skewing down that income trend? If you're in your.
Well, I suppose that's one way of looking at it potentially. The other thing that, you know, we really haven't gotten into this concept in the context of parking lots. The assessor has noted that compared to office buildings, for example, the nature of the improvement is much simpler, obviously. It's paving, it might be some plugs, there's much less there, but at the end of the day, there is money that needs to be spent to replace or repair paving over time. You don't see any of those expenditures reflected in the net operating incomes or in the expense listings, and that will occur over time. And we don't have a concept of a non-recoverable expense in the context of parking lots, so I'm not going there, but I'm simply suggesting to you, let's not lose sight of the fact that over time, parking lots do need significant repairs and replacements as well. And that's my way of saying I think the average is okay.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Wareham?
I just wanted to focus on the commentary of the history of the parking lot, and the cap rates that have been applied by the city, and you've arrived at the preferably 6%, albeit possibly 5%, based on what's previously happened. This was appealed in 2018.
I anticipate so.
It was. Are you aware of what cap rate was placed on it at the Board of Revision?
I'm sure you're going to tell me.
Well, you can say you don't know.
Ma'am,
Are you aware the board did put a 5% cap rate on it?
if you're telling me that, I will accept it.
Okay, I guess that's my question, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay. All right, any requirement for summary, Ms. Wareham?
I don't think so. I think we got into it, and again, I think Mr. Newman would agree, so if the panel would allow me. We went into a lot of detail. I'm not gonna probably go into as much detail with respect to cap rate unless you guys want me to. I think it'll just expedite the process if we can make sure that we keep everything in mind that I said for this property. It definitely applies to the rest of them because they're all in very similar locations and close proximity and assessed very similarly, so.
Okay,
And I
Noted.
accept that as well.
Noted.
If there's something I feel appropriate to bring up on a specific one, I will.
okay, okay. Noted on from both parties, thank you very much. Okay, that concludes file number 19-1719. McDermott Avenue. Next property on the docket is 129 McDermott Avenue, file 19-4124. We're dealing with a 2020 realty assessment. Ms. Wareham, when you are ready, please.
Thank you. So we're looking at file number 19-4124. The address is 129 McDermott Avenue. The roll number is 13096045500. This is a surface parking lot with 116 parking stalls. If you look on page 2, you'll see its location near the northwest corner of McDermott Avenue and Waterfront Drive between Ship Street and Rory Street. It's actually directly beside the property we just talked about. I'm recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $3,202,000. If you look on page 3, you'll see subject property photos. Again, this parking lot is managed by Indigo. They're managed by a parking management company. On page 4, you'll see requests for income and expense information. On page 5, you'll see the income valuation summary for the subject property. We have 116 parking stalls with a monthly net unit rent of $103.50 a stall, with a 4.5% cap rate coming out to $3,202,000. On the bottom of my page 5, you'll see a number of parking lots, some with low parking stalls, some with high parking stalls. They range in values, they range in expense ratios, but you'll see the range for these parking lots for the market on a per stall rate. This is information that was reported on income and expense mailers. Ranges from $90.01 a stall upwards of $300.74. You'll note that comparable number 5 is actually the subject property. They're reporting that they make $112.91 a stall, and we are assessing them for $103.50 a stall. On page 6, you'll see the income valuation summary. On page 7, you'll see cap rate information, and I believe we've gone into significant detail about cap rates. Again, on page 20 of my brief, again, there's more cap rate information. On page 8, you'll see Municipal Assessment Act information. On page 9, you'll see the income and expense mailer that was submitted for the subject property for 2017. And on page 16, you'll see the Indigo details showing that there's hourly, daily, evening parking, as well as monthly parking on this property operated by Indigo. And then on page 17 through 22 is the addenda to my brief. I'm happy to answer any questions or clarify any information on my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wareham. Mr. Newman, any questions of the assessor?
Yes, so I gather on this property, your system would have valued both land and income, and it defaulted to income because that was the higher value.
I believe so.
Do you know what its derived land value was?
No, I can't speak to that.
Okay. Looking at your first page indicates that this lot is 38,916 square feet, correct?
Correct.
So it's large enough to have development potential, would you agree?
It is a large lot, yes.
Those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you. Marla, any questions of the assessor?
No questions.
Thank you. Cynthia?
No questions.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Ms. Wareham. Mr. Newman's brought up the fact that the model would develop two values, one on the land value, I suppose, one on the income approach to value, and is it true that the assessment would automatically, or the model would automatically choose the higher value?
Typically, yes.
Okay, so when you get that value, and you've got two valuation methods in front of you, you as an assessor would look at both values and in your opinion make a judgment on which better reflects the market value on the subject property.
I believe with respect to what's happening in the exchange, this is a larger parcel and does have development potential. Although the income that's on this parking lot has been a parking lot for a while, unless someone has someone who's willing to purchase this property and develop it, right now, the highest and best use I would think for this parking lot is a parking lot. They're deriving a very high income, they have a good demand on the parking lot. Also, when you look at the $3,202,000 on a per square foot basis, it's $82.28 a stall. Based on looking at land sales, or yeah, sorry, per square foot. Thank you for correcting me. Sometimes my mouth goes faster than my brain. $82.28 a square foot, which, considering its location, is not one of the more prime locations in comparison to some of the downtown land sales that we have. So I would consider this a good indication, because when I look at the land sales that have happened in the downtown, they're closer to the MTS Center. They have more proximity to the Burton Cummings Theater, the MTS Center, things that are happening where there is a lot of stuff going on. So I think on a per square foot rate, and considering this is a little bit of a more awkward shaped parcel, you'll notice that it has like a little tail. There's some like back lane things that are happening with it. It is large, albeit it's a little bit more narrow. So I think that the value that's been come up with on an income basis is very reflective of market value based on a per square foot and based on the income. So I was very confident with the information I have based on looking at market information for parking and market information for direct sales. So I'm pretty confident with the value that we have, that it is a market value
Okay.
number.
Yeah, I guess I was asking in general because obviously it's gonna come up on every one of these properties today, that there's two methods of valuing it. I was just wondering how you decide which to apply for each property. In this one, you've chosen the income approach.
We value all properties based on the income approach for income producing properties. So the city of Winnipeg comes up with a land value for vehicle service garages, multifamily properties. We have all of those. We look at it as a site as if vacant. The only difference is when it's a parking lot, because of configurations and how the stalls are set up, you end up coming into the discussion as to whether or not land versus income a lot more than you would on a building, because there's all of those things. So that's why the discussion comes up, but the city is dealing with parking lots the way they deal with all their properties. It's an income producing property, they are valued on the income approach to value. And if for whatever reason, if our system defaults it to the land, we review it to decide, is this market value? And at the end of the day, we're looking at market value. We're not arguing, at least the city isn't arguing, the approach that we've used. We're looking at market value and what a willing buyer would purchase the property for, what it would trade for on the market. So when you're doing an appraisal of something, you come up with a final estimate of value. You don't decide, oh, I'm only using this. You look at your different approaches and you decide which has the most weight on it.
Okay. Thank you. All right, that's my only question. Okay, Mr. Newman, when you're ready, please.
So, let's go to my brief. Let's pass by the first 2 pages, which are the text. Let's look at the attachments, which are numbered, starting with 1 in the lower right-hand corner. So the first page was the assessment. The second page is the assessment website showing the configuration of the property. And as to the assessor's comments about the tail, yes, there's a little tail there at the end, or maybe it's a pot handle, depending on how you want to visualize it. But all I would say about that is, at the end of the day, obviously that wouldn't be part of any development. The rest of the site is substantially rectangular in its nature. Page 3 is the standard on mass appraisal of real property, and of course, the city adheres to the IAAO standards, and this tells you how you do mass appraisal on land. And so on page 4, there's a heading 4.5, land valuation, and it then goes on to discuss different types of properties. And you can see the table at the bottom. There's an item called non-agricultural land, and it indicates that the first approach is the sales comparison approach, and the second approach is the income approach. So there's a ranking as to the preferred approaches. If you look under the heading in the text, 4.5, land valuation, the second paragraph, land value should be reviewed annually, at least once every 4 to 6 years, the property should be physically inspected. And then it says, the sales comparison approach is the primary approach to land valuation and is always preferred when sufficient sales are available. So then over onto the right-hand column, 4.6, first paragraph, appropriateness of each valuation approach varies with the type of property under consideration. Table 1 ranks the relative usefulness of the 3 approaches. And then if you go to the next page, left-hand column, the heading 4.6.4, non-agricultural land, sales comparison approach is always, or is the preferred approach for non-agricultural land. And then if you go to page 6, an excerpt from the appraisal text, appraisal of real estate, 3rd edition, and it talks about the concept of interim use, which you've actually heard the assessor and I talk a little bit about already. And an interim use is one that a site is put to until it's ready for its future highest and best use. This site has development capability, and accordingly in the future, its highest and best use will be something other than a parking lot. Therefore, that would suggest the approach should be the direct comparison approach. So now we have to look at sales. And so now we go to the last 2 pages of my submission, and that is a chart of sales throughout the greater downtown Winnipeg area, including some sales in what I'll call generally the Exchange District and outside of the downtown core. You see a lot of sales. I've tried to explain the reasons for these various sales as well. And again, quite clearly, sometimes the price per square foot is quite high, but if you look at what's going on in those transactions, you can see that they are frequently a land assembly where there's a motivation to buy it for a specific purpose. What you don't see, and what's difficult to find, and I acknowledge the assessor's comments in this regard, you can't find parking lot sales because a lot of these things are bought and then they're hung on to or they're converted quite quickly. But I will point you to the 155 Gary sale, and that's a property at Gary and York. That was a government tender. The purchaser was quite motivated. That went for $84.78. And the reason I reference that in particular is because that's one where the use has remained the same. Many of the others have been redeveloped. But this is within the downtown core. The subject property and many of the others we're going to deal with here today are outside the downtown core. So ultimately, I'm suggesting to you a value of $65 a square foot, which would put a value on the property of $2,529,000. The median is $66.97, which is midway between the 11 to 12 sales on this array. The average price was $74.63, but I think once you come into this area, because it's part of the character area from a zoning perspective, there are greater limitations imposed in terms of how properties can be developed, all of which I suggest to you would have the effect of bringing down the value. And on that basis, I'm suggesting to you $65 a square foot. Those are my submissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Ms. Ware, any questions?
I do, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Newman, you would agree that you've presented information from the IAAO and the Appraisal Institute of Canada on how to value land, correct?
Yes.
Does the IAAO or the Appraisal Institute of Canada, are you aware of any standards or set methodology on how to develop parking lot values?
I think there is something. I don't have it with me, but I believe that there is something.
Okay. But you haven't presented that today, you've just presented on how to value land.
Right, because of my view that this property, because of its size, the parking lot is in interim use.
Now, you spoke in your previous presentation about appraisal methodology and following appraisal theory when looking at how to come up with market value for your properties, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so when doing appraisals and looking at things and looking at different approaches to value, when coming up with how you would put weight on the values you've come up with and your different approaches to value while doing an appraisal, do you not agree that when you're thinking about that, you think about how many sales you had, the number of adjustments that needed to be made, and the amount of evidence when you're placing your weight on those approaches, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you indicated in your presentation that there are not sufficient sales available for parking lots. So would you not agree that when
On an income basis.
when you don't have sufficient sales, but you have a lot of market evidence to come up with income, would you not think that there could be an argument to be made to place weight on income because there is market evidence available?
There's not market evidence of income-based transactions on parking lots. There's market evidence of land values on sites that have an interim use as a parking lot.
Okay, when you say market evidence for income-based transactions, are you still saying income-based transactions for sales, or are you saying market evidence when you're doing an income approach to value, you have to look at market evidence with respect to the different pieces of the income approach? What people are willing to get on a net operating income, capitalization rate. So are you saying there's no information for those pieces of the income approach?
There's a lot in that question.
Okay.
And I'll try and answer it simply by saying what I was saying was that there's no transactional evidence of the income-based sale of properties that are used as parking lots.
Okay. And my next question, you're requesting $65 a square foot based on the land sales that you've presented. You indicated that the median is $66.12, I think you said, and the average is $74.63.
Yes.
The $65 you're requesting, that was the same per square foot rate you requested in 2018, correct?
You're telling me that, yes?
So you don't think that land values have increased in the past cycle?
So here's the issue. If you look at this chart, you can see that the land values, I'm gonna use the word skewed. Look at the first number of values, 245 Graham, the famous Fortress Sky condominiums across from the post office. 44 Hargrave, the 390 Assiniboine site where that condo has gone up. 286 parking lot, they need parking for the Pint. Carlton is the Sutton Hotel land assembly, which is under construction right now. All of those sale prices are impacted by the motivation of the purchaser who are buying those properties for commercial development purposes. So what I'm suggesting is that if you actually took those out of the equation, and those are all in what I'm going to call superior locations, because they're in the downtown core, around the new True North development, around the MTS Center. If you took out those properties and then looked at the range, you're actually gonna come up with a much lower number. And that's why at the end of the day, I think my $65 is quite reasonable.
Okay. My next question then, you talk about taking things out and looking at things. You have a number of, Princess and King that's significantly outside of the downtown core. We have stuff on Colony that are at the low end of your range. Do you not think that that's also offsetting some of those higher numbers in your analysis?
So Princess and King, I would agree. The Colony one, 316 Colony, that's adjacent to the University of Winnipeg, and that's why it was bought. I don't think that is any further outside the downtown core than the subject.
Okay. Now, you spoke in your presentation about, or your previous presentation as well as this one, small parking lots do not have the same development potential. So this parking lot has 38,916 square feet, correct?
Yes?
You spoke of 155 Gary, which you said is a good sale to look at because it's still operated as a parking lot. It's 18,000 square feet, correct?
Yes,
And the subject is significantly bigger, correct?
it is.
And it sold in 2015, which is 3 years prior to the reference date, correct?
It did.
For $84.78.
It did.
And the subject property on a per square foot rate based on its assessed value is $82 a square foot. How can you explain how you've arrived at using $65 a square foot versus $84.78 when the subject property has much more development potential than 155 Gary?
Sure. So first of all, Gary, because of its it has a superior location. It's located in the downtown core central business district. Secondly, there was a motivated buyer who was looking to acquire some property. Thirdly, I'm not looking at a single transaction. I'm looking at a spectrum of transactions, and looking at the spectrum of transactions, the market simply is not that one transaction, but it's a variety of transactions.
Okay. You indicated that the buyer was motivated. Did you interview the parties involved in that sale?
I did actually speak to that purchaser.
And do you know what their motivations were?
They are a property owner who has a very long-term view of matters. This is the second generation that's in the business. The third generation is being brought into the business. They just have a very long view of things and are prepared to acquire properties without regard, without the same investor, what's the right word? They're not looking at the short-term yield, they're looking at the longer term, and therefore that discipline that a shorter-term investor might apply is not something they apply.
Okay, and do you know the purchaser, like the name of the purchaser, who
Yes.
they were, and who
Yes.
were they?
It's a corporation, but the principals are the Brown family,
Okay.
who are the Leon A. Brown.
And the corporation is?
I don't remember the name, I have it in my files.
Okay. Is it Fort Park Inc.?
It is, yes.
Okay. So, okay, those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Marla, any questions of the appellant?
No, they've been covered, thank
Thank you.
you.
Cynthia?
So at what square footage land area would you start reverting to looking at parking lots as land rather than income?
I don't think there can be a single correct answer to that. I think it's going to depend on the location of the property. An 18,000 square foot lot, for example, as is 155 Gary, because of where it's located, might lend itself and accommodate itself to putting up an office building, for example. An 18,000 square foot footprint, if you could get that, isn't a bad footprint for a building. So it depends how
Okay.
vertical you're gonna go, how horizontal you're gonna go.
In looking at your, the comps you had for land sales, some of them being several years old, if I look at, like even within the last 3 to 4 years, looking at those tend to be other than one on Colony, they tend to be quite a bit higher than the rate that you placed on this if you're looking at the most recent sales. So I was going from about, 16 and up.
Right, so if I look, for example, and you mentioned Colony, which is on the second page, so that's October of 17, and that's one that was purchased for multifamily development at $54 a square foot. So from a timing perspective, it's in the right time frame. It's proximate to the reference date. And then, of course, you'll have to consider locationally, is it superior, inferior, that type of thing. You've got the Spence property, which was acquired as overflow parking for 500 Portage, the development that's on Portage, at $73 a square foot. I would suggest that that's somewhat superior. You also have the concept of economies of scale, that the bigger the site, typically the lower the rate per square foot. So, you know, yes, but I would point to those, and I would say those are in the relevant time frame, and then I would start to look at things like the location, inferior, superior, economies of scale, and that type of thing.
Okay, thank you, that's all I have.
Thank you, Cynthia. Okay, Mr. Newman, let's look at, I'm gonna start with page 5 of the addendum
Yes.
regarding that point 4.6.4. At the bottom of that paragraph, it also does state that sometimes income approach applications can be used. In that, when you highlighted that non-agricultural land mass appraisal.
Under 4.6.4,
Yeah.
and you're saying at the bottom of the paragraph,
Yeah, sometimes income approach.
Oh, yes, I can see that.
Can also be used,
Right.
okay? So, okay, so my next question is, for the record, I guess you're asking that parking lots not be valued on the income approach.
subject, in a general sense, if they're big enough for development, yes, not on an income approach.
Okay. Do you have any municipal board orders that support that
No.
theory? No. Has it been brought to the municipal board?
I don't think
That
parking
argument?
lots have gotten there.
Yeah.
Parking lots have gone to the municipal board, they just, it's not an argument as to whether or not the land or income is used, because to speak on the city's behalf, we present different approaches to value within our municipal board briefs. We go through a very thorough, analysis, and we present direct sales evidence, income evidence. If cost evidence is appropriate, we would, and then we would do follow appraisal theory, where we would, place weight and reconcile our approaches to value and come up with a final estimate of value based on all of our information. There's never been an argument as to what method is appropriate, because we're here today, which I've already said, trying to come up with market value. Not the approach that's used, but what is the appropriate final market value of a property?
Yeah, okay, but my question was related to, sorry, Ms. Warren, is you're asking that the approach to value be completely changed on certain lot sizes that are surface parking lots? You're asking it be to comparison approach to value and ignore the income statements?
You're saying completely changed. I don't like that phrase,
Okay.
because this, as the assessors noted to you, they use the land approach as well on parking lots.
But they don't present it, they're.
Well, they're gonna present one in a little while to
Okay,
you.
okay,
One of the later ones on the docket is land value,
right, okay.
so you're gonna hear that in a
But
minute.
we're not there yet.
I
Okay,
understand.
yeah, okay, but in this case.
Yes.
This subject property, and so far, and most of the time, maybe I won't say that, the income approach to value is usually presented at this board. I shouldn't say that, we're just dealing with this subject property, but you're asking this board to not accept the income approach to value. on
I'm
this.
asking you to prefer in the case of this parking lot, because of its size,
Okay,
to prefer the land or sales comparison approach.
okay.
Yes.
Okay, so my last question is regarding 155. I guess your vacant land sales
Yes.
on the last 2 pages. That 155 Gary Street. So it was purchased, its use at time of sale was a parking lot?
It was historically a government parking lot.
Okay.
So it was not available to the public. Then the government put it out for tender.
Okay.
And the buyer came along and bought it.
So it was listed by the federal government, I believe?
Provincial.
Through an agent who did a market evaluation on it?
I don't think it was done through an agent. I think the government, through its own resources, put it out for sale through a tendering process.
Okay.
They invited bids.
They invited bids, okay. And I think you stated it was Leon A. Brown.
Yeah.
Longtime family in the real estate business. paid about $85 a square foot for it, and it's still used as a parking lot?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I spoke to them.
Yeah.
You know, and the founder, Leon Brown, has passed on, but one of his sons, Robert Brown,
Right.
runs the business, and I spoke with him about this.
Okay.
And thank you for reminding me of the name of the corporation, because when I saw the sale, I investigated, I actually searched out the title and who the owner was, and then realized it was the Brown family. So I spoke to him, and, you know, part of what I inquired of him is, when you bought this, did you buy it based on the income? He said, no, it didn't matter to us, because there was no historic income as well, because it was a government-operated lot. It didn't matter to them what the income was. He said to me simply, we bought for the long term, it came available, we just wanted to buy it.
Yeah. Well, everybody buys for the long term when they buy vacant land, whether it's to hold on to it, to make income from it, so.
Or for an
I guess I'm
alternate
questioning
use.
why that's a motivated purchaser. When it was up for tender in the open market,
Because their discipline, if I can use that term, in deciding to make the acquisition was a very generational premise, a foundation in terms of how they approached it.
okay, they're knowledgeable in the marketplace, that would be fair to say. Are you saying they overpaid for it at $85 a square foot?
Time will tell.
Okay.
But that's part of the reason why I say, and look, that's the problem, you know, there's the expression, one sale does not make a market. That's why you've got to look at a number of sales, and because you've got to get the proper measure of the market, because one sale is unduly motivated, the other one isn't. So what does the spectrum of sales tell you about the market? And of course, comparing locations as well.
So 155 Gary, is that south of Broadway or north?
South.
South.
Sorry, north.
Okay.
North. It's Gary and York.
Gary and York, okay, yeah, all right. All right. So we're not by the Crystal properties, we're north, okay. York Street, okay. Back by the lotteries, kind of in there. Further north, I guess. Okay. All right, so, my final question for the record, you were asking us to value the land at $65 a square foot, and you're coming up with a value, requested value of $2,530,000 rounded.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Ms. Ware?
I have a redirect on the line of questioning from Ms. Stevens previously to Mr. Newman when he was talking about his land sales and economies of scale. Would I be permitted to ask another question?
Of course.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, you talked about economies of scale with respect to properties. And I'll agree that economies of scale is something that definitely happens in the marketplace with respect to land. The bigger the parcel, the less someone's willing to pay. Have you noticed when you analyze downtown land sales, do you notice that economies of scale actually plays a factor? Would someone in the marketplace buying downtown land pay a higher per square foot price on a small parcel? Or would they be motivated based on looking at the sales you've provided? The bigger the parcel, the more they're willing to pay, because the more they can do it with it in downtown specifically.
And I think the answer is it depends. And certainly, you know, you see on some of the larger parcels that very high prices were paid. On some of the smaller parcels, high prices were paid as well, because in some cases, it's the final piece of an assembly that's needed for commercial development. And so there's a motivation on that buyer and a willingness to pay more.
Okay. But would you not agree, looking at your sales, there are a couple that are smaller that have higher prices, but a majority of the smaller ones on your second page, 6,000 square feet, 6,000 square feet, 6,600, they're $30, $32, $32, $54. Would you not agree that there are a couple outliers that are small parcels that have high prices, but a majority of the small ones are the low prices?
Well, I guess, you know, certainly there are some in the 6,000 square foot range that are in the $30 range, as you suggest. There's, I think, an equal number in the 6,000 square foot range that are north of $100 a square foot. I think it's very much a function of what the buyer needs it for and what they're your motivation is.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for permitting me.
No problem. Okay, any requirement for summary, Ms. Warren?
I don't think so.
Okay, Mr. Newman?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we are gonna take a 10-minute break. So we'll be back at 20 to 11. Thanks, Belen. Okay, I will now call the hearing back to order. Next property on the docket, file number 19-1724. And we're dealing with 0 McDermott Avenue, a 2020 Realty Appeal. Ms. Wareham, whenever you're ready, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As stated, we're looking at file number 19-1724. The roll number is 13096103300. The address is 0 McDermott Avenue. If you turn to page 2, you'll see the subject property location on the southwest corner of McDermott Avenue and Waterfront Drive, just near the other 2 parking lots we talked about. This is a service parking lot with 26 surface parking stalls, and I'm recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $718,000. On page 3, you'll see subject property photos. This parking lot is not operated by a parking management company. It is parking for the adjacent building, and it's used exclusively for the use of their tenants, which from the City of Winnipeg is a business decision for them. On page 5, we have an income, the modeled income, which is 26 stalls with a monthly net unit rent of $103.50 a stall at a 4.5% cap rate for $718,000. Again, on my page 5, you'll see the comparables, that these are a range of sizes of parking lots. They range from 4 stalls upwards of 116. We have some that are 22, some that are 30. We have a number of range of different stalls, but these are all within a walking distance of the subject property. A number of these are on Valentine and McDermott in close proximity. And the range of per square foot rate that is being reported is $90.01, upwards of $30.74. With a bulk sitting around range of our monthly net unit rent being applied by our model. On page 6, you'll see the income valuation summary. On page 7, you'll see cap rate information. On page 8, you'll see Municipal Assessment Act information. On page 9, you'll see the mailer for the subject property. And the mailer goes all the way through to page 15, and on page 16, you'll see the City of Winnipeg's addenda information. Again, I went through that very quickly just because we have gotten into some very in-depth discussions on previous properties, and again, those arguments and discussions apply here. Again, if there is any clarification that anyone needs, I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Wareham. Mr. Newman, any questions of the assessor?
Do you know what the land value the model calculated was for this property?
I wouldn't know offhand, no.
Do you actually, when I gather you didn't prepare the original assessment of these parking lot properties?
What does that mean?
So when this property was put on the roll,
Okay.
when the 2020 assessment came out,
Okay.
did you put the assessment, did you fix the assessment, or did the model do it?
I believe the values that were placed on the information, I can't speak to, I'm not really sure where you're going, like, we don't physically go in and put numbers on properties. I was involved in analyzing the data for the 2020 assessment. I was involved in the discussions with our modelers of the information they came up with, information that we came up with, looking at what had happened in the market. I was involved in looking at our parking model. I don't think anyone actually goes in and decides and presses.
Let me ask it differently. Because for this type of property, the model generates both a land value and an income value, does somebody actually look at the two values and make a decision which one should go into the roll?
No.
The model just, it's whatever the higher value is. Okay. And as you noted, this lot is immediately behind an office building. That office building is 93 Lombard, correct?
Yes.
And you noted that this lot services that building. Does the city recognize the concept that a building can't exist without parking and therefore will treat them as a single economic unit?
Not in the downtown. In the downtown, a building is not required to have parking. It's a benefit to the owner if they do, because they can charge higher rents, they can attract tenants, but those are arguments that can be made on the building for the value of the building because they have this parking that's available. But if you're looking at parking in an area where it is not required and you're looking at it, this parking lot can have evening parking on it, the owner can give the parking to the public, they can do whatever they want on it. They've chosen to use the parking specifically for the tenants of their building, for the benefit of their building.
Okay, those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you. Cynthia, any questions of the assessor?
I don't, so the model is just, mind you, all of these last three are all, like, almost right next to each other, but the model's putting the same rate on all of these lots regardless of, in that inner downtown? Okay.
Yeah, we have a range for the inner downtown area, that we look at the different variables. We have a range for all of our parking models, whether it be structures, inner downtown, outer downtown, and we can look at different things. For example, if you're a parking lot in the inner downtown and you're right beside the MTS Center and Impark or Indigo can charge $300 a stall for a surface parking lot, that's a much higher quality parking lot than something that's, say, on a Simplon Broadway. So our model, even though there's an inner downtown that has the ability, we've been able to look at the information that's given to us on mailers, and we've been able to see these little pockets that are higher quality locations. So in the exchange is a higher quality location than what the average inner downtown would be. Stuff that's closer to the MTS Center is even of higher quality. And as you get further from those little pockets, the evidence that's shown to us on the mailers, when you look at the different areas, even within our inner downtown, there are sort of different things that can be considered. So we're able to see those trends with respect to the mailers that are given back to us. So that's why, and
Okay.
again, these are all sort of
They're
the
very
same.
next to each other, so,
Yeah.
okay, that's all I had, thanks.
Thank you. Marla? You're good? Okay, thank you. Okay, Ms. Wareham, on page 9, the income and expense statement for 2017.
Yes.
So, I kind of got the impression this was an owner-occupied lot used for 93 Lombard, but I guess not, because there's a declaration of about $48,000 in income.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's going on here with?
So what I'm seeing here, and from my history of dealing with this property, Mr. Newman and myself, I think, have been discussing this property since 2016. It was previously managed by a parking management company, and that management agreement was severed. They charge for the parking. If you look and worked 47,000, 988,000 backwards, they're charging about $153, $54-ish a stall. They're charging for the parking because they have parking. They have costs that they have to upkeep. They have, property taxes they have to pay, snow removal. They have to cover those costs, and they may want to make an income on it. But they're not charging what the market charges for parking. $154, you can't rent a surface parking lot for $154 in the area. If you look at the comparables that I've shown on page 5, rates that are charged for surface parking within walking distance, $190 at 129 McDermott across the street. Down on Bannatyne, $185, $205, $190 to $230, $210 to $285. These are all significantly higher than $154. So the person who's operating this is giving a deal to their tenants, probably in exchange that they can garner higher rents in their building, because they can say, look, you have parking that we can offer you at a below market rate. And that's enticing to tenants. And that is why when you look at it, and we're looking at what market value for parking is, they are making a business decision to charge significantly less than what's available. They're making a business decision not to have evening or hourly parking available on their parking lot, which is typical for the area. Typical for the area is offering evening parking, offering hourly parking, things like that. So they're making a business decision for their specific property, which we, as the City of Winnipeg, are not considering what is market for parking.
Okay, thanks for that explanation. That's my only question. Okay, Mr. Newman, when you are ready, please.
So 7,505 square feet, so again, you've got a smaller lot, one that I don't think would have development capability on its own because of its size. And so I I've recognized the income approach in looking at this property, but that will raise three things. One is the question of the NOI, the other is the question of the cap rate, and the third is the question of the connection of this building to the adjacent office building. And as we've already heard from the assessor, the city does recognize when you're outside of the downtown core, the concept that there should be an adjustment, there should be an economic unit adjustment based on value, and the attachments to my brief, starting at page 1 in the lower right-hand corner, the decision of one of the panels of this board relating to 570 Portage, and it's behind lot at 280 Yonge, was simply to illustrate the recognition of the concept of the economic unit and the recognition of the fact that these office buildings are dependent, and there's an interdependence between the lot and the building in terms of their existence. It's no different in relation to this lot. As the assessor notes, the owners have made a business decision to operate the lot for the benefit of the tenants in the building, but of course that creates additional value in the building, and that value ought not to be multiplied, if I can use that phrase, by essentially not recognizing the synergy between the building and the parking lot. Having said that, and the assessor will say, but it's downtown, and because there's no requirement under the zoning, that doesn't matter, and we're not going to subtract one from the other. On the cap rate, you've heard me on that already. Again, it's a smaller lot. Economies of scale, is it worth the vendor's investment, the time and management, and all of that? You've got 3 years of questionnaires, you've got 3 years of NOI. The average NOI over the 3 years is $19,607. I have a typo on page 2 of the text of my material under the heading conclusion, the third paragraph down. I talk about the capitalization rate that's in place for the building, which is 8.2%, and I then say that if you apply that cap rate to $32,292 of income, but I say should be capitalized at 8.5%, that should be 8.2%, and the value of $393,804 is correct for an 8.2% capitalization rate. So, but where am I getting this $32,292? It's the assessor's NOI. The actual NOI the property is generating over the 3 years has been essentially between $19,000 and $20,000. The 3-year average is $19,607. The assessor is saying there's $32,000 of income, and I'm saying if you're going to capitalize $32,000 of income, capitalize it at the rate that's associated with the building, which is 8.2%, because of the interdependence between the lot and the building. If you're going to capitalize it at the assessor's cap rate, and that's not me conceding 4.5, but if you're not going to capitalize it at the building rate, then let's look to the income of $20,240, for example, in 2017, the 3-year average, and then I would say the same thing I've said to you previously. There's no transactional evidence to support the 4.5, and so I've given you alternative numbers in the conclusion section at 6, which would be $326,000. So, subject to questions, those are my submissions.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Ms. Wareham, any questions of the appellant?
I do, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Newman, you indicated in your presentation, I think you said that outside of the downtown, the city recognizes a single economic unit. are you saying that the city typically, when outside of the downtown, will be matching cap rates for different property types to the predominant use? Because I'm not aware of that practice.
So, no, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
And so there's a variety of different circumstances happening. So, for example, I'm aware of a site where there is parking revenue, one rule, building, office building, and parking lot on the site, and the city's applying, because it's outside the downtown area, a 5% cap rate to that parking stream and a higher cap rate to the building. So I'm aware of that.
Okay.
I'm aware of another circumstance, and it's actually later on this docket, where the city's recognized the relationship between the parking lot and the building, and is actually deducting the value of the parking lot from the building value, and that's we're going to talk about that at the end of this docket. So that's another circumstance. So there are different circumstances, and all I was saying is that I'm not saying that the assessor is matching cap rates to building cap rates.
So this board order that you've put in, you'll agree it's a board order for a different property that has not been presented here today with the evidence that was presented. And you'll also agree that this is outside of the downtown, correct?
Yes.
So there's no requirement at the subject property that we're talking about today to have parking, correct?
No, under the bylaw, it does not require its own parking.
Okay. You know, I was gonna ask another question, but I think I'm good, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Marla, any questions of the appellant?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Cynthia?
I think my questions were just answered, so I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Newman, for the record, so we've
Yeah.
got two income stream workups here, I guess.
Yes.
So one, are you accepting the city's NOI but capping it at 8.2%?
Yes.
Equals 394,000 rounded.
Yes.
The second option is using the actual NOI at 6% equals 327,000 rounded.
Right.
Okay,
And yeah, obviously, you've got other options in terms of that NOI, but yes.
so which one,
Well, I'm asking for 6.
but which NOI?
Oh, so my preference is to use the NOI the building generates at 6, which is 326. I'm giving you an alternate position that if you're gonna use the assessor's NOI, then you need to match it to the building cap rate.
Okay. That is my only question. Ms. Wareham, did you think of the question, or?
No, I knew the question, I just
Okay.
decided I didn't wanna ask the
Okay.
question.
All right, okay. Okay, any requirement for summary from either party?
No.
No, I don't
Okay,
think so.
thank you. That concludes file number, sorry. 19-1724, 0 McDermott Avenue. Okay. Work up there.
This is my favorite lot of all time.
It's a little one.
It's a little one.
All right, so the next property on the docket is question mark Waterfront Drive. File number 19-1727. Okay. Number 19-1727, addressed on Waterfront. And we have a 2020 Realty Appeal. Ms. Wareham, when you are ready, please.
Thank you. So as stated, this is file number 19-1727, roll number 13096049200, address Waterfront Drive. I'm recommending to reduce the 2020 assessed value from $158,000 to $110,000. This is a surface parking lot with 4 parking stalls located on the west side of Waterfront Drive in front of 200 Waterfront. Now, this is the question that is always asked on this property. Why do we have a 4-stall parking lot attached to 200 Waterfront Drive? Why have they not been replotted to put on one roll? The answer to that is because they have 2 different legal owners. They have 2 different numbered companies that own the property. They're likely the same people, but because they have 2 different corporations that own those roll numbers and are on those titles, we as a department cannot merge them. That being said, if this was put on the roll number with 200 Waterfront Drive, that is an office building with an attached parking structure, with this, there would be 3 income streams. There would be an income for the parking structure based on the model, an income for the parking lot exactly how I'm about to present it, and an income for the office building. So if you look at page 3, you'll see subject property photos of the 4 stalls that are on this property. On page 4, you'll see the income valuation summary for the subject, or not the income expense information request. And on page 5, you'll see the modeled income approach, which is what my recommendation is based on. Clearly, this defaulted to, I shouldn't say clearly, this defaulted to a land value based on our model, which after reviewing, based on the fact that it's 4 stalls and no one is going to pay that price on a per square foot basis for 4 stalls, I then looked at what is our modeled income on it? Does it come up with a per square foot rate that makes more logical sense in the market based on the land sales? Or do I have to go with a land recommendation that's even lower but higher than the income? So when you look at 110,000 based on the square footage that we have, I believe it works out to $52.31 a square foot, which I believe for 4 stalls at 2,100 square feet, being a very small property, that makes more sense. And there are sales that are presented here by Mr. Newman himself today that defend that number. So our modeled income approach on this is 4 stalls with $103.50 a stall, capped at 4.5%, is $110 a square foot. Again, my comparables that I've shown are all within walking distance, all very close proximity to the subject property. If you actually look down the list at number 12, this is our 4-stall lot. They have a 47% expense ratio, which is very close to our typical modeled expense ratio. For surface parking, it's 45%. So they have an expense ratio that is very typical of the market. They're making $106.96 a stall. So we're pretty confident with the modeled rate that's been applied to this that I have presented in our recommendation. On page 6, you'll see the income valuation summary. On page 7, you'll see cap rate information. Page 8, you'll see Municipal Assessment Act information. On page 9, you'll see the mailer that was submitted where I got the information that's been placed on the comparable chart on page 5. And pages 16 through 21 are the addenda that the City of Winnipeg has that shows our cap rates and the information that we have presented in there that has previously been discussed. I'm open to any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Wareham. Mr. Newman, any questions?
So the system defaulted to land.
It did.
Maybe I should ask you, are you accepting the recommendation, 110? Okay, I'm sorry, okay, thank you.
So it's a good start, but, so the system defaulted to land, and you're saying that land value was $75 a square foot?
I think that's what it works out to.
Yeah. And, do the city's models developed for purposes of valuing land apply generally the principle of economies of scale, with the result that the value for this parcel, because of its size, would be higher on a per square foot basis?
I believe previously it had, and because I've been dealing with parking for some time and you've seen me come in and say, we've had to, the land value, based on the sales that we have isn't making a lot of sense, therefore we've looked at the income and we felt that not meeting in the middle makes sense, but the value that I've presented makes sense. So in doing so and looking at what has happened and how land was modeled, There were a number of discussions that, and this was some commentary that I made previously. On my experience looking at land in the downtown, economies of scale does not exist in the downtown, because there is not a lot of downtown land.
That wasn't my question.
Okay, but I'm gonna get to it. Because there's not a lot of downtown land, and the evidence that is shown by the sales, similar to my commentary on we take a fresh look, I believe the recommendation that was made to our modelers was, when you're looking at downtown land, you should review whether or not you're seeing trends in economies of scale and whether or not that should be applied. I can't speak to whether or not that actually did happen, but that I do know was a recommendation I personally made, that they should be looking at the evidence that they have and deciding if that makes sense, because based on the information I've seen and the analysis I've done, economies of scale does not exist downtown. People will pay, to say it very lightly, a pretty penny for a large lot, and people aren't as motivated for smaller parcels. People will pay a big amount for big properties. Like Mr. Newman presented in his brief, Sky City, that was a big property. People wanted to pay a lot of money for that.
So I think through all that, what you've said is that historically, the model in valuing land did recognize economies of scale. You suggested it should be looked at in the context of downtown, and you don't know if it was.
I saw evidence of it based on looking at land sales. I made the recommendation. From what I've seen so far, it looks like maybe they took that recommendation. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and
Would
again,
have to,
my question is
again-
only about the model.
Yes.
Right, all right. Obviously, this is a small lot, and, you know, I made the comment earlier in the context of a 13-stall lot that, you know, investors, there's a scale, there's a return on their time and energy. Is this one likely to attract fewer buyers because it's just too small to attract anybody's interest?
It clearly should be operated together and on the same roll as the other one.
So is that a yes to my question?
You would have to restate it.
Do you agree that investors looking at an investment of this size would require a greater return to compensate for the time and energy on a small investment of this type?
I don't think it would require a greater amount of time and energy and the focus on the return on investment. I'm not sure I agree with that statement, no.
Those are my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Newman. Marla, any questions of the assessor?
No.
Okay, thank you. Cynthia?
Nope, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Wareham, are you using the income approach at 110,000?
Yes, I've shown that on page 5.
Okay, and, okay, so the way I'm reading the income and expense statement on page 9 for 2017, the actual rent collected is $9,600, you're assessing it at $4,968. The NOI is $55,134. You're coming up with an NOI on the adjusted model, shall we say, at $4,968. Okay, and then you have a cap rate of 4.5%. And in regards to the land value, based on this recommended reduction, so I think Mr. Newman said it was at $90 a square foot. I'm getting $52 a square foot.
So it was at 75. The original assessment of $158,000.
Oh, okay. So, but now at 110,000, it comes to 52.31.
Yeah, and I presented that when I said that's how I arrived at deciding when I looked at the income. Because my first step when something defaults to land,
Okay.
I look at the land rate and then I look at what the income the model is producing. And I think Is the income making sense? Should it be a land rate that's a little bit higher? Are we confident in the land rate that's been applied by the model? So I look at a number of things, and so the first thing I always look at is what's the income coming out on the model? So when I looked at it, I looked, okay, we're at 103.50. We have comps to defend that. The subject property has a great mailer with very bang on expense ratio. They're making slightly more than the NOI that we're applying. So I thought that would be a good indication. So then my next step is I look at the 110,000 and I work it backwards to that $52, which, looking at the land sales, and Mr. Newman's provided a number of them, $52 makes sense on a per square foot rate for a smaller property, because we're seeing sales of large properties upwards of $100 a stall, or a square foot I should say, there I go saying stall again. Upwards of $100 or even more a per square foot. Bigger parcels are usually in the range of $80, $90+ a square foot. So $50 a square foot for a very small property, because from the trends I've looked at in analyzing the land sales myself in preparing for hearings, I don't see that economies of scale. It wouldn't make sense for me to come in and say, okay, we have these sales of 70,000 square foot parcels that are selling for $110, $150, $90 a square foot, for me to say, okay, because of economies of scale of this 2,000 square foot parcel, it should be higher. That doesn't make reasonable sense to me.
Okay.
So I'm pretty confident that $54 a square foot for a small parcel makes sense, because someone would probably pay $54 a square foot because they're trying to buy it as an ancillary use. And Mr. Newman had pointed to a number of sales in his brief that were at $30, $50, where people have done that.
Yeah, I just didn't understand where that $75, but that was on the original assessment, and you're at 5231, but you're using income income approach to value. Okay, that answers my question. Okay, Mr. Newman, when you're ready, please.
Let me make the observation that I don't think there is a market for a 4-stall, 2,103 square foot parking lot that is landlocked, as this one is. You can't get to this lot except by crossing somebody else's property. So this is a very unique situation, obviously. And I say to you simply that any investor, given the option of buying a larger investment, because frequently the amount of time and energy you need to expend in managing a property does not increase geometrically or proportionately with the size of the property. So a lot of what you have to do on a 50-stall lot or on a 4-stall lot, you need to arrange snow clearing, you need to arrange insurance, you need to do a variety of those things. It's no different, the amount of time you need to spend. And do you rather spend it on a 4-stall lot, or do you rather spend it on a 50-stall lot? And that's my way of saying to you, I think an investor is going to require a higher rate of return on a lot of this type. Even if we take the assessor's NOI of $4,968, she's capped it at 4.5. If we cap it at 6, we get a value of $82,800. That's what I'm suggesting should happen here. Because again, generally I say to you that there's no market for this. It's a very limited market. There's risk associated with it. It's a landlocked property. And that's my submission to you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Wareham, any questions of Mr. Newman?
No, not at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Marlene, any questions?
No.
Of the appellant? No, thank you. Cynthia?
Nope, thank you.
Okay, so just to confirm, Mr. Newman, you're asking us to accept the assessor's NOI at $4,968, but cap it at 6% equals, sorry.
$82,800.
Okay. $82,800, okay. So, and then I'll say, You included last year's board order, I believe.
I did.
And the decision was, just read it here. It states use the applicant's NOI and a cap rate of 5%. Okay. That was the last cycle, right? Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question based on that when you're done your questioning?
Yeah, that was all I was just gonna confirm. Matt, yes, of course, go ahead.
Mentioning the board order, based on the applicant's net operating income and a cap rate of 5%, was that 5% the model generated cap rate from last cycle?
Yes.
Okay. And the applicant's net operating income, would you agree that last cycle, the property was making less than the net operating income applied by the city, and this cycle, the net operating income that is being derived here at the site is more than our model?
Marginally.
Okay.
$100
But
or $150.
they reduced it because they weren't making as much last cycle, so they reduced it and kept the cap rate the same. So they acknowledged the income that was actually being generated on the 4-stall lot was less, but now our model is less.
By $100 odd.
Okay, all right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Like
for
I said,
reminding me
my
that.
favorite lot, very unique.
And yet they get so much money for it.
Mr. Chairman, if you'll permit me, and if Mr. Newman agrees, would we be able to do 125 Lombard next, just because all of these properties are literally beside each other, and 330 Donald is in another location? That way we don't have to talk about a new area and new information, and we can sort of keep the information we've been discussing fresh in our minds, because it's all together.
I'm fine.
Would that be okay?
Okay, sure, so
That
we're
way
gonna-
we don't have to be switching back.
So we're gonna jump to item number 6. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, and that would be 125 Lombard Avenue. You okay with that? Ellen,
Oh, yeah, no,
you got
it's
it?
your-
You got us organized here, okay.
All good.
Okay, file number 19-1718, we're dealing with a 2020 realty assessment. Okay, Ms. Wareham, when you're ready, please, let me find it first. Sorry. You're getting
Sorry
me
for
conf-
causing
you're getting me
confusion, I
confused.
apologize.
Oh, that's okay.
I just thought it might create less confusion
No,
having
you're
to
good.
jump back and forth.
Okay. So we're dealing with 125 Lombard, okay. Item number 6, right? Okay, Ms. Wareham, when you are ready, please.
Thank you. This is file number 19-1718. The roll number is 13060690000, and the address is 125 Lombard Avenue. This is a surface parking lot, as you'll look on page 2, located on the north side of Lombard Avenue between Main Street and Waterfront Drive. It is near the intersection of Lombard Avenue and Westbrook Street. It's located next to the old brick fine furniture building at 111 Lombard. It has 102 parking stalls, and I'm recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $2,815,000. On page 3, you'll see subject property photos. The top 2 photos are the access off Lombard, and the bottom 2 photos are the access to the lot off McDermott, so it has access from both sides. On page 4, you'll see request for income and expense information. On page 5, you'll see the modeled income approach with a stall count of 102 stalls with a monthly net unit rent of $103.50 a stall with a cap rate of 4.5%. If you look on page 5, again, all of these comparables are in close proximity to the subject property, and they range from $90.01 upwards of $300.74. On page 6, you'll see the income valuation summary. On page 7, you'll see cap rate information. On page 8, you'll see Municipal Assessment Act information. On page 9, you'll see the 27 income and expense mailer. On page 16, you'll see the 2016 income and expense mailer. And on page 21, you'll see the 2015 income and expense mailer. And the reason I included all of those is, if you look at the mailer for 2017, because I have analyzed parking, I always notice anomalies. So when I came up with this one, I thought, this one's coming up with a really low per stall rate. In the past, it's been much higher. It's actually been one of our comparables. So I thought, well, why is this happening? So I went back and I looked at the previous mailers for the subject property. And you'll notice that on both previous 2016 and 2015 mailers, there aren't any expenses. There isn't snow removal, there's not maintenance and repair. There's none of those expenses. And typically, from the information that I've gathered, when situations like that happen, a land lease is happening with a parking management company where they lease the property and they're responsible for the expenses other than, insurance, property taxes, but they cover those costs. And then further from that, whether the owner has to repay them or not, but when it's not reported, it's our belief from the information we've gathered with looking at parking information that the parking management company pays those costs, so the owner does not. So previously, the owner wasn't reporting any maintenance or repair on the property. And then in 2017, when you look at the mailer, they're reporting a 27% repair and maintenance expense in 2017. And I thought, they haven't paid any repair and maintenance previously. So sometimes what happens is when people reinvest money for capital expenditures, they put it on the repair and maintenance line, as opposed to the capital cost summary that would be shown on page 10. And a 27% repair and maintenance is on the higher side for parking lots. So based on looking at the stabilized net operating income, I didn't rely on the income that was presented in 2017, which is why it's not presented on the comparables here, because when you're looking at the stabilized between the years, there is an anomaly there. They have a lower net operating income. So I just wanted to point out, because that is one of the questions that would be asked, well, their actuals are much lower than what you're assessing them for. That's not typical. Something has happened this year where they've decided to reinvest some money, or they have some higher repair and maintenance expenses, which isn't typical of the market or typical for this property. So I just wanted to explain that on the outset. Also, you'll notice in our brief, this parking lot is operated by Indigo. So on page 32, you'll see the details that they post on their website. This is taken as of the reference date from the website. So they offer hourly parking at $3 an hour, daily parking at $14, evening max at $4, and then their monthly rates range on the type of parking you're getting from $195 a stall upwards of $220 a stall. If you look just at the $195 and you apply a typical expense ratio, it's coming in around $107.27 a stall. If you look at the $220 rate and a typical expense ratio of 45%, that's about $121 a stall. So just looking at the rates that they charge in this lot, you can tell something's going on with that income and expense mailer, but I'm confident that our modeled rate that we have applied to this property is what is expected in the market, and I've shown market comparables to justify that. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. That's my presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Wareham. Mr. Newman, any questions?
26,101 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
Fronts both onto McDermott and onto Lombard.
Mm-hmm.
Property has development capability.
Yes.
Because of its size.
I would believe so, yeah.
Those are my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Mara, any questions of the assessor?
No questions.
Thank you. Cynthia?
No, thanks.
Thank you. Just bear with me 1 second, Ms. Wareham, please. Okay. I have no questions either, thank you. Mr. Newman, when you're ready, please.
So, on this property, similar to one of the ones you've heard before, I've approached it because of its size and because of its development capability on a land value basis. I didn't ask the assessor whether she knows what the land value was on this property, but that's okay. And you've got, at the end of my brief, you've got the same chart as you've seen previously. In looking at this property, however, because of its presence, because of the fact the lot is on Lombard, and it also fronts potentially onto McDermott, so it's got a choice of frontages. I felt it had a higher value than 129 McDermott, which was placed at $65. I placed this one at $75 for those reasons. It's the same set of comparables we've looked at before. The comparables in the downtown business core that were required for specific projects. We need to be careful of those values. You've got the same excerpts from the standard on mass appraisal in terms of how to value land. You've got the same excerpt from the appraisal of real estate on interim use. And really, my submission is ultimately the same as I made previously, but because of this property's location, which I consider superior, because of its frontage on two streets, I described a higher value to it of $75, and that results in a value of $1,957,000. Subject to questions, that's my submission.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Ms. Wareham, any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just so I understand, because of its frontage on both streets, the property on one side of the street, you're applying $75 a square foot to, and one you're applying $65 a square foot, correct?
Well, I guess it depends on which street you call the street. If you're
Okay,
saying,
on the two parking lots are across the street from one another, they're across McDermott from
Yes.
one another.
Yes.
And so there's a $10 difference between the two,
Yes.
and your explanation for that is its location and has frontage on Lombard as well as McDermott.
I consider it to be a superior location, and really, it's not so much McDermott, it's Lombard.
Okay,
That gives it much greater visibility.
okay, thank you, those are my questions.
Thank you. Cynthia, any questions of the
No, I'm
appellant?
good, thank you.
Thank you. Marla?
No questions.
And I'm good too. Requirement for summary, we're good?
I don't think so.
Thank you. So that concludes 125 Lombard Avenue. Then we're gonna go to item number 7, which is file number 19-4120. Bear with me a second, please.
Mr. Chairman, I had conversations with Mr. Newman prior to the hearing about this property, and I believe he's withdrawing it.
Sorry, aren't we on 330 Donald?
No,
He said
we're
item
going-
number 7.
Item number 7.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, so, item number 7 is a parking lot located on McGee, which is behind an office building at 709 Portage. And as you've heard a little bit through the course of the morning's hearings, that's one where the city, in the context of the office building appeal, has agreed to deduct the value of this parking lot on the basis that it's a single economic unit, and on that basis, we're prepared to withdraw the appeal.
Okay, so file 19-4120. Mr. Newman is going to withdraw the appeal.
And just to make some statements, since Mr. Newman was permitted to do so, we haven't acknowledged it in the sense that it's a single economic unit. It's an office building with, I think, 55,000 odd square feet with like 10 parking stalls on the actual parcel. So if you look at the zoning bylaw indicating office buildings require about 750 square, per, one parking stall per every 750 square feet. It requires about, I think, 90, 85 stalls, and in total, there's about 84 stalls on the property. So we've acknowledged that they require those stalls as per the bylaw, so we've reduced the value. I don't think I'm just talking semantics at this point of calling it a single economic unit. And we looked at that in a site-specific way, and I just wanna preface that it's not something that applies in any way to the downtown, and I just didn't want there to be any confusion because there has been talk of what we do outside of the downtown and downtown today, so I just wanted to make it very clear that it's a very different situation than what we've been talking about today.
Okay, Mr. Newman? You're
I
okay?
heard her, I'm okay with her comments.
Okay, so we're gonna sign a withdrawal form, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's, that gets item number 7 withdrawn from the docket. Okay. Now we're gonna go back to item number 5, and that's 330 Donald Street. And then we're dealing with a 2020 realty assessment, file numbers 19-4094. Ms. Wareham, when you are ready, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So again, we're looking at file number 19-4094, roll number 13-052-306-500. This is 330 Donald Street. It has a land area of 18,173 square feet and has 60 outdoor parking stalls. And if you turn to my page 3, you'll see the subject property location on the northwest corner of Ellis Avenue and Donald Street. So I'm recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $1,928,000. So there's been a lot of commentary throughout this hearing from Mr. Newman and myself with respect to how the city goes about looking at things. And I believe that both parties were anticipating this property on the docket for that particular reason. The city of Winnipeg does come up with multiple values, and the highest value just gets defaulted, and then that gets sent out. So then if the property is appealed, we have to then review it. This property is a property that has defaulted to the land value because our modelers who have valued the land and look at land sales and come up with land values for downtown properties placed a rate of, if you look on my page 6, of $106.11 a square foot on this property. So the first thing I do is I look at the property and I think, okay, $106.11. But when I look at land sales, I think, okay, there are land sales to defend that. Does that make sense for this property and that location? And today on the docket, I did make a recommendation where I went from a land value to an income value because it didn't make sense. In this particular case, I agree with the market value that's been placed on this property for a number of reasons, and I'm going to go through that. If you look at the subject property location on page 3, it's on the corner of Ellis and the corner of Donald. It is a block from the MTS Center. Everything in this square block between Hargrave, Donald, Ellis, and Portage, almost everything, has been redeveloped. That new parking structure at 329 Hargrave was brand new. A bunch of properties were acquired and developed there. Where the Alt Hotel stands, those properties were acquired and demolished, and a new hotel and office tower was built there. This whole block is ripe for development, and that has what has been happening because of its great location and close proximity. With respect to this being a parking lot close to the MTS Center, also with True North acquiring the Burton Cummings Theater, there are a lot of things happening in this area, and parking is something that people want and something that can garner income, and people, so for on an income portion as well as things that are in close proximity to the MTS Center, people are wanting to develop this. That has been clear with the history of this block. When you go to page 4, you'll see the subject property photos, and then on page 6, you're going to see comparables. So I've presented some land sales here today. We have our assessed value on the far corner of the page, and then we have some land sales. I have not chosen to use a number of land sales like Mr. Newman has. I've chosen to use 5 that I believe are comparable. The first one is at 225 Carlton Street. Yes, we all know that this was purchased for True North Square. This was purchased for True North. I'm not denying that. But again, when you're looking at land sales, you have to look at what people are purchasing in the market. And it was, I'm acknowledging it, Mr. Newman stated it, they purchased it for redevelopment. The subject site has development potential on it. We have 155 Gary, which was purchased for a long-term investment, still a parking lot, but we're still looking at land sales that have happened. So we have a number of land sales on Smith Street. This is across from the Union Center parking structure, almost at Broadway. So a very inferior location to the subject property, which again, time adjusted because it's an old sale of 2014 to $95 a square foot. Our subject property, I believe, is a better location than the last 4 comparables on the sheet. 325 York and 160 Donald. They're both on the corners of York and Donald and Hargrave. So again, significantly much further away from the MTS Center or Burton Cummings Theater than the subject property. 155 Gary, as previously stated, on the corner of York and Gary, an inferior location to the subject property. The only one that I think is a comparable location is 225 Carlton. It has a good location, it's near the MTS Center, but in my mind, when you're looking at parking and development potential and all of those things together, this is a great location considering the development that has happened on the block that the subject property sits on. So when you look at the sale prices, they range from $65.90 a square foot, upwards of $96.98. These are all sales. The newest sale I have is 2016, and again, our reference date is April 1st, 2018. And our time adjusted, our modeled time adjusted sale prices, they range from $95.45 upwards of $117.42. And we're at $106.11. When I looked at that and I looked at what's happening at this location, I believe that the final market value on this property is defendable and we are hitting the mark. To further evidence that point, on page 7, I haven't come up with, but I've also presented our modeled income value. Similar to how you would do an appraisal, you show your 2 approaches to value. Hopefully they're close together. If they're not, you can reconcile why they're not close together or what you're placing most weight on. So we have 60 stalls at a monthly net unit rent of $117 a stall, at a 4.5% cap rate for a value of $1,872,000 versus our assessed value of $1,928,000. Those are very close together. I think that's even within 3%. Now, for our inner downtown parking model, the parking rates range from, you'll have to just bear with me while I pull my information together. $63 a stall up to $117. Now, when we did our new look at the 2020 reassessment, we have an inner downtown model and an outer downtown parking model. Previously, this parking lot, if you turn to this page, page 3, there's a red line across Ellis Avenue. The red line indicates it's an NCA boundary, a neighborhood characteristic area. Previously to the 2020 cycle, that NCA was part of our outer downtown. So it was getting lower rates, but after looking at the information that's been reported on mailers, information that parking websites have provided based on what they're charging in gross rates, that area is much more comparable to our inner downtown. So for the 2020 model, that was moved into our inner downtown, which meant we had to look at, okay, what's happening in the area. Now that we're moving things, it made us have to reevaluate some of the qualities that we have on other lots that were previously in that inner downtown, and look at what they're getting as rent on a per stall rate, and then reevaluate the qualities that are placed on those properties. And it was noticed, based on all of the evidence that we looked at, that those properties are garnering much higher rents compared to what was happening in the inner downtown versus the outer, which is why that NCA got moved. Also, the subject property as well as the comparables, which you look on page 5, these are all different comparables than what we were previously talking about, which is why wanted to deal with the exchange. These are comparables that come from our core downtown. These are parking lot comparables reported on mailers, so you'll notice we have Donald, Vaughan, Edmonton, Smith, Fort, Kennedy, Fair. These are all parking lots that are in the same subject area as the subject property. And the range of values for these areas range as low as $100.09 upwards of $200 or $255.22. And you'll notice that a lot of these rates are significantly higher than the 103.50. They're in the 110, 113 range. Because things that are close to the MTS Center, as you get closer to the MTS Center within, I'll call it the shed, but if you actually look at a map of the shed, sports, hospitality, entertainment district, it isn't all, I sort of refer to Balmoral Street, Portage Avenue, Main Street, and Broadway as the shed, but that's not really defined if you look at a map of the shed, what it is. So as you get further from the MTS Center in that area, they charge less rates. As you get closer, they charge higher rates, they have event parking. A lot of other parking lots further away don't offer event parking, but if you're near the MTS Center, when there's a Jets game, when there's a concert, when there's anything that's happening there, they're charging you $20 to park there for that event. So, looking at the income information and looking, for example, at comparable number 4 at 264 Smith Street, that's the next closest parking lot to the MTS Center. It's directly across the street. It's beside the church that's on Donald there across from the MTS Center, if you know where that is. Also, comparable number 12 is the subject property. So all this to be said, as I've been saying, people make more money because of event parking, the closer you get to the MTS Center, so our model recognizes those things. This property is reporting that they're charging $165 a stall a month, which is significantly less than what most people are charging in those areas per month, because they're able to gain that extra income because of their location to the Burton Cummings Theater and the MTS Center. They're making $123.54 a stall. Our model is at $117 a stall for an income value of $1,872,000, and we have land sales that, in my mind, justify the assessed value of $1,928,000. So right here, I have shown the logic that I go through when I'm coming in before this panel to look at parking lots, discussing between the arguments of what method have we used, how we went about it. At the end of the day, I'm looking at market value, and I'm looking at what's equitable, and looking at fair and just assessments. And I believe what is happening here, I've shown 2 approaches with market evidence for direct sales as well as market evidence for income. And the subject's property is making significantly more than our income model is even showing. So I think that I've done my due diligence in presenting to this panel 2 different approaches to value that are very close together, that make sense. And if you were doing an appraisal and you have these 2 values that are that close together, you can put equal weight on both, and I believe that I've done so. So pending any questions, I'm happy to answer anything.
Thank you,
I've
Ms.
done my
Werner.
presentation, I should say.
Mr. Newman, any questions?
Yes. So, in the process of fairness that you described, and that's why you presented both an income approach and a land approach on this one, why didn't you present the land approach on all the others?
Because on this one particularly, I decided to present an income approach. I was going to just present a land approach because that is the value that I was defending. But I wanted to go the step further with the evidence of sales. I could have easily put this sales chart in all of the other briefs and then said these are all sort of inferior land rates to these sales. But I didn't feel that they were as appropriate, because in the downtown core, which is the land sales that I've presented, there are fewer land sales in the exchange. Most of the sales, even in your chart, there aren't really any exchange land sales. So I didn't think it was appropriate to be presenting downtown core land sales and then just saying to the panel, okay, here's a bunch of land sales that are at about $100 a square foot. but we're, using an income value. I would have to reconcile that a lot more, and I felt that it was more information that needed to be gotten into.
And also, they would have come in lower than, the assessment would have come in lower on on the land basis than on the income basis.
I would have presented the exact same land chart on all of these, and I would have said that the subject property is an inferior location to these.
So, so these comparables you've selected, and I mean, you're right, 225 Carlton, that's where the True North Center now exists, so the big office complex that's been built there. Let me ask you about the time adjustments. Does the model do it? Do you know what the adjustment is on a per month basis?
No.
Okay, so I've done some calculations to try and figure it out.
Okay.
And if the panel is prepared to let me, what I've done is I've taken this page and I've just scratched up some calculations on it. It might be simpler if you simply let me put this in front of the assessor and ask the questions with it. Okay.
He can hand it out, but again, the information that's come up with the model, I'm not sure he's gonna be able to get a lot of answers from me, just
Fair
because
enough.
I didn't apply the time adjustments, I didn't analyze sales for the time adjustment factors that the model's placed. Here.
Thank you.
So let's just generally, so the concept of the time adjusted model is that there's data gathered, and that data will be used to determine what the price of the subject property would be had it sold at the reference date compared to what it would have sold at the point in time when it sold. Okay. Do you agree that the most correct way to do that type of analysis is through what is called paired sales?
Okay,
And you know that what a paired sale is, you look for a property that's actually sold twice.
yes,
And so once earlier in time, once ideally at the reference date, but closer in time, and that gives you the gauge of how the market has treated the property in terms of an increase. But we don't have paired sales to take advantage of.
in this chart or just in general?
Well, certainly in this chart, and certainly I'm gonna suggest in the downtown area.
Well, I wouldn't agree with that, because Sky City actually sold on multiple occasions, so you can create a paired sale analysis on that, because I think it sold 3 separate times at 3 different dates and times.
Sure. And what's happened with that property?
If we're looking at paired sales,
Sure. All
there
right.
were 3 separate sales, so you can look at a different increase from one sale to the next, Sky City being the last sale that took place on that. But there were 2 previous sales prior to that third one, so
Okay.
that could be 2 time adjustments you can come up with.
All right. So, but ultimately, your view is that the subject is superior to all of the comparables?
No, I didn't say that. I said it
Okay.
was I believe it's a superior location to the last 4 comparables.
So to the Gary, to the Smith, to the Donald, and to the York,
Yes.
but not to 225 Carlton?
No.
And is that because True North has been built at 225 Carlton?
No, just with respect to the sale itself, it's got a larger square footage, there's more things that can be done there, the location itself is closer to the MTS center, so I believe it's superior. I wouldn't say it's significantly superior, but I think that if you were to rank our subject property in these properties, it would come in second.
Okay. And in terms of being ripe for development, so you talked about the fact that Hargrave between Portage and Ellis has been developed. You've got an apartment building, you've got the parking structure. Donald between Ellis and Portage has been developed in the sense that you've got the old hotel, you've got an older office building that still remains there, and you've got the office building, restaurants on the main floor on the corner of Portage and Donald.
Yes, that was part of the alt hotel development.
And do you think with all that development having happened in the area already, this property remains ripe for development, and that there is more development to happen in that area?
I wouldn't think that there's more scheduled to happen, but the fact that people have wanted to build on this location, it's a good thing for the property owner to have to be in the location that they are. So if someone did wanna come along and purchase the site, the owner, I think, is in a good position to ask a significant amount of money for it because of its location and the history of what's happened when you look at what's been going on in the market.
And what about the quality of Ellis Street? So diagonally across the street is a giant tiger, correct? Would you agree with me that Ellis is a bit of a rougher street than Portage, for example, and historically has been a bit of a rundown area?
I think historically, but in the past few cycles, Ellis has been in that area. There's been a lot of things happening, a lot of upgrades. The Burton Cummings Theater has upgraded theirs. They've been purchased by True North with the MTS Center being there. I drive home down past that parking lot every single day, and when there's a Jets game, there are a million people around in Jets jerseys. People are going to the Yellow Dog Tavern. People are going to all of those locations. So I think historically maybe people were a little bit nervous of Ellis, but I think that pocket where Ellis is, when you get further west down Ellis, possibly, but I think this location has seen a lot of rejuvenation because of all of the development that's happened and all of the things that are going on. So I'm not sure I agree with that.
Okay, and so ultimately, the land value is kicking out $106 a square foot based on this set of comparables, all time adjusted, right? And that's the primary basis for the assessment, and the secondary support is in the form of the income approach.
The model has a number of sales they look at. They would look at a lot more than 5, but when you do sort of an appraisal or when you come before the board, I'm going to present what I think are the most comparable 5. After looking at all of the sales, that's sort of my job, is to come in with market information that I believe is comparable and makes sense.
Okay. Those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Marla, any questions?
I think everything has been covered.
Thank you. Cynthia?
No, I think I'm good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. My only question, Ms. Wareham, is regarding page 7, your workup
Okay?
as related to the INE submitted for 2017. I know your policy is to go with the model generated monthly rent, but when I look at the INE, you are nearly $20,000 underestimating the NOI.
Because we work on mass appraisal, and I have come in here and said time and time again, just because a parking lot is making slightly less or significantly less than what is in our model, there are a lot that make more. We're in the business of mass appraisal. We have a range of comparables that show parking lots are making more, parking lots are making less, but we have to look at what, when you're looking at market, you're looking at medians, you're looking at averages, you're looking at things that are outliers. So we're not gonna go to exactly what they're making, because I can't confidently come in here and say, I have confidence in our parking model if I'm doing that. I think our model is hitting the mark on what market is, and yes, it's less than what they're making at the subject site, but I'm not gonna decrease things because someone's making less or increase things. If we're talking about market value, we have to be fair and equitable and look at what's happening in the market, and that's just what happens. Some make more, some make less, but what would the reasonable person look at, and they would take all of that information into consideration.
Okay, and you made a comment that the highest outdoor parking stall rate you have in the downtown core there is $117. Is that the high end?
That's what our model place is. That's
Right.
the highest rate that our model places on
Yeah,
stuff,
okay.
yes.
Okay, that's outdoor only, right?
And that's outdoor only. We're not talking parking structures
Yeah.
for the inner downtown. That is the highest rate that's applied. So, for example, 416 Main Street That's a gravel parking lot, and that gets $117 a stall because of its location and proximity to Portage and Main. So similar to, we look at, like I spoke to this on a previous property, we look at the trends that we're seeing on mailers in those little nodes. Like, we have an exchange area, but there's some parts of the exchange that are just getting more money than other parts because of some things like that. Similar to the MTS Center, a parking lot on Broadway and Donald isn't gonna be making what a parking lot across from the MTS Center is making. That's just what we've seen in the data, so that's how our model's working.
And that downtown, you made a comment that the line has moved to Ellis Avenue, between Portage and Ellis.
It's been, do you mind if I like hold this map up? So this was these are external documents that we submit on our website to people, and it's like a map. So the white is our outer downtown, the yellow is our inner downtown, the white is our suburban, the yellow is our outer downtown, and the green is our inner downtown. For the 2020, this yellow part here and this yellow part on the bottom at Broadway at Assiniboine, those have been moved to the green.
Oh.
So we've taken in those NCAs. So it's not about moving the line to the other side of Ellis, we've actually moved the entire NCA. So the whole neighborhood characteristic area. So I'm not sure how far away this goes, but the line originally for that NCA was Ellis.
So in your analysis, the shed development is encroaching outwards or moving outwards and bringing up values?
When you look at the shed development, a lot of people, like I said, think of it as bounded by Portage, Main Street, Broadway, and Balmoral. But they've actually, I think Centerpoint on their website has a map that they've put out, and the shed development is, I think, within 2 streets of the MTS Center, except most people think it stops at Portage. Because Centerpoint did it and said this is a Centerpoint development, the shed actually on their map extends to include this square, this block that the subject property sits on.
Okay.
So it's technically part of the shed.
But I guess it's also an overspill from the Exchange District too. It's working its way south there.
Ish. Just because the exchange, I always think of as on one side of Portage and Main, where I think of this stuff as sort of on the other side, which is why we've presented different comparables. It's close to Portage and Main, but a lot of our exchange stuff is the hub of like Bannatyne, McDermott, this sort of area. More the concert hall, theater district.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, that's all my questions. Mr. Newman, when you are ready, please, 330 Donald.
So, like a couple of the prior properties, and as I had said to you earlier, I mean, here's an example of a property that is valued on the land approach, as was an earlier one, and that's because the model defaults to the higher value of the 2 values. You've got from me the same material from the standard on mass appraisal that we talked about earlier. You've got from me the same material from the appraisal of real estate on an interim use. You've got from me the same chart of comparable land sales. I disagree with the assessor in the sense of her enthusiasm for the north side of Portage. Yes, I acknowledge that this block is included within the shed. Centerport really had no choice. They promoted all this development. They got this new development into that block, and it had to be part of the shed district for that reason. I think you've seen obviously a lot of development in that area. I don't think this site is ripe for development. You've got a lot of development that has happened south of Portage now in the sense of the True North Center and the Sutton Place Hotel, which is under construction right now. And in my mind, still the center and focus of development and activity in downtown Winnipeg remains south of Portage. The fact that on the nights when there's something happening at the MTS Center, you get a crowd of people down there. That's true, you do, but that doesn't turn into an everyday or every week development opportunity. So overall, I take the view that the site is less valuable than the assessor suggests. The marked up comparable sheet that the assessor handed out, if I can just explain to you what I did on that sheet. So the first line of my handwriting is the increase between the sale price and the time adjusted. So for 225 Carlton, the first comp, the difference is $20.44, and on a percentage basis, over the original $96.98 sale price, on a percentage basis, that's a 21% increase over a period of 25 months, which I calculated to be 0.84% per month. That's what I was doing, because I wanted to see what the model was saying in terms of what the percentage increases were on a monthly basis. And you can see that as you work across the sheet, 155 Gary has gone up based on the model by 0.85% per month. The Smith Street site has gone up by 0.922% per month. Donald and York have each gone up by 1.259% per month. And essentially, in the context of Donald and York, what that's telling us is that year over year over year, land prices are increasing by 15% a year. 1.25% per month times 12 is 15% on an annualized basis. And I say to you, in a general sense, there is not land value increases of 15% per year happening in downtown Winnipeg. Yes, are there isolated properties that have sold for higher per square foot amounts because of who's buying them and what they're going to do with them? I would say to you, yes, I agree with that. And in looking at this set of comparables, as the assessor noted, 225 Carlton, it's all about the land assembly for the large office building and complex that is now the True North Center. 155 Gary we've spoken about in terms of the motivated buyer. Smith Street, the indication that that's across from the Union Center parking lot at 130, or parking structure at 131 Smith, that's true, but what must also be understood is this sale was part of the sale of an office building at 305 Broadway. So it's not a sale on its own, it's part of a sale of an office building on the corner of Broadway and Donald. 160 Donald and 325 York, both sold at the same time as part of the same transaction. And again, it's part of acquiring control of additional parking in the downtown area for the development which became the True North Center. So each of these, I'm going to suggest to you, have their own generally their own commercially related aspect to the transaction. This property on the north side of Portage on the corner of Ellis, I suggest does not have the same opportunity, and does not have the same motivation that the subject property did. When I look at my chart of land sales, again, remember I told you that the median was $66.97, and yes, admittedly, but that's the midpoint of the 20-odd sales. The average is $74.63. That average obviously will be impacted by both the highs and the lows. The median helps us concentrate where the numbers come out, and ultimately, I selected a value of $75 per square foot. In part, I selected that value because of the recent sale of the property on Spence Street in September of 2017 at $73.74 a square foot, which was acquired by the owners of the 500 Portage complex, which is a large residential and commercial complex for additional parking for them. But I selected it nonetheless, and ultimately I'm suggesting to you a value of $1,362,000. Of course, in terms of the income approach to value, remember what I've said to you about capitalization rate earlier, and my view that there is no evidence to support a further compression to a 4.5% cap rate, and so my suggestion would be that even the income approach is not necessarily supporting the value of $1,872,000 if, of course, you assign a different capitalization rate. So subject to your questions, those are my submissions.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Ms. Wareham, any questions of the appellant?
I do, just a couple, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll try to be quick. I noticed this in your explanation of your sales in your chart, but I pinpointed to it more acutely when you explained it, looking at the time adjusted handout that you said. You said 160 Donald and 325 York were part of the True North development, is that correct?
Yes,
How is it part of the True North development?
in the sense of controlling parking.
Are they the people that purchased it? Cause I, to my knowledge, those two parking lots were purchased with the building at 155 Hargrave. On the corner of,
Hargrave or Carlton?
I believe it's Hargrave. Like 160 Donald and 325 York are the two parking lots on the bottom of York between, I believe it's Hargrave and Donald on York, which is in my mind nowhere near the True North development at all, because it was a sale that came with all of it. Like it's not anywhere near that, so I was just wondering how.
What's 155 Hargrave? Is it the apartment building across?
No, it's the office building. I will pull out that information. It's either I think it's on the corner of St. Mary and Hargrave. So, sorry, Mr. Newman, you see this map? This is York,
Yeah,
this is Donald. There's the City Place parking lot here.
yeah.
There's a parking lot here, this is 160 Donald, this is 325 York, and these two parking lots were purchased in conjunction with the office building at St. Mary and Hargrave, which in my mind is nowhere near the True North.
That's 330 St. Mary's, that office building. It's the one that's connected by the skywalk to City Place.
I would have to look further at the mailer, but it has to do with the building, and it's either the building in between or the one on the corner. But
Yeah, so those three buildings
Are
between.
those True North?
Between St. Mary's and York are 330 St. Mary's on the corner of on the corner of St. Mary's and Hargrave, the old Royal Trust building as it was
Okay.
called.
Then it's not 330, because
Then
it's
you've
definitely
got
got a Hargrave
185
address.
Hargrave, and you've got 175 Hargrave. 175 Hargrave is the one that Oscar's is on the main floor.
Yeah, that
Those are the
one,
ones you're thinking of?
that one, that building.
Right.
So how's that True North?
Um,
Like, to me, that doesn't seem anywhere part of the True North development, because all of that is on Graham and Carlton. So I was just confused about your statements that saying it was part of True North.
I'll have to check that.
Okay. Because that's not what my information has
Yeah,
told
I'll
me,
have
so
to-
I was a
I'll
little
have to
bit
check that.
confused. Okay, and my last question, sorry, I got off track there. You're using $75 a square foot, which is the same that you used on Lombard. Would you think that both locations are comparable?
Well, they're different, obviously. They're
Mhm.
different in terms of location. Lombard, both are, in my mind, outside of what I call the central business core.
Okay,
And I know you'll suggest to us that the central business core has now crept north of Portage. And again, certainly there's development in this block, but I don't think generally the central business core has crept north of Portage. And, obviously the True North Center development south of Portage is focusing a lot of activity and people into that area. So they're not exactly comparable, but when I compare them relatively speaking and look at the sales as well, looking at the average, looking at the median, the combination of those things, that's why I picked the $75. It's the same rate, but it's for somewhat different reasons.
so you think they're equally good locations for their own reasons, is essentially what I'm asking?
Equally good or equally poor for their own reasons.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those are my
And of course,
questions.
that statement is relative to the comparables.
Absolutely.
Right.
Anything else, Lindsay?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman, sorry, I thought I had said that, my apologies. fees.
Okay. Marla, any questions?
No.
You're good.
I'm good as well.
Cynthia, okay.
Yep.
My only question, Mr. Newman, so you're asking us to revise it based on the land value of $75 a square foot to $1,363,000?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm looking at the actual NOI submitted by the mailer, and capped at 6% would equal $1,730,000 on the income and expense or income approach. Capped at 5%, I think we've seen evidence from last cycle's board hearings that 5% seems to be popping up. It's about $2 million by the income approach. So how do you reconcile a difference of between $400,000 to $700,000 in the two approaches to value?
Between the income and the land value, I reconcile it simply on the basis that the appropriate methodology for interim uses of this type is the land value approach.
Okay, that concludes 330 Donald Street. Requirement for summary, sorry, before I say that, I should ask for
I
summary.
think we're okay. I
Okay.
think we've really dug in deep.
Mr. Newman, you're good?
I'm good, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay, so that concludes our hearing today. Thank you both for appearing,
Thank you.
and we'll hear from